Chapter 510. When they checked into the guest house of Chongqing University, there was a small setback. Perhaps it was because she saw that the 4 members of the Xiong family were in ragged clothes, but the girl at the front desk insisted that the rooms in the guest house had been arranged for the professors who came to the meeting. Even Poplar Fruit, who had not yet obtained the participation certificate, was not able to get the key to his room. Xiong Jiwu knew that he was not very popular with the people in the city, so he quietly pulled Poplar Fruit's clothes from behind and said in a low voice, "Poplar Fruit, it's okay. Xiao Yi is in the hospital, so I can find a place to stay. The weather is not cold." Before Poplar Fruit could speak, Chen Zongdai lost his temper and said angrily, "Who said that there are no rooms? There are 5 or 6 empty rooms on the floor where I live. Why can't they be given to us?" Chen Zongdai's every movement had a kind of magnanimity, and after he got angry, his momentum soared, making the girl at the front desk keep quiet. "Isn't it just a few rooms for you? Do you have to reject me so much?" Chen Zongdai slammed the table and said, "Did the country train you to look down on farmers? But there are rules." The girl at the front desk hid behind the table and said weakly, "And you have a dog. So what if it's a dog? Can a dog stay in the guest house? Rules are made by people. Why are you guys so stubborn?" Chen Zongdai said resentfully, Forget it. I'll go up and call your leader over." Originally, Chen Zongdai did not want to give the impression that he was bullying others, but he could not reason with them. He was impatient to waste time with them. President Chen. Suddenly, there were a few hurried calls in the lobby. Everyone turned around and saw a middle-aged fat man in a work suit running out of the inner room in a hurry. When he saw the person, Chen Zongdai's face relaxed a little. He stopped and responded faintly, "Manager Song." The quarrel in the lobby not only woke up Kiki in a daze, but it also woke up the lazy manager, who was sleeping in the inner room. Manager Song touched his hair that he hadn't had time to fiddle with and said with an apologetic smile, "President Chen, I'm really sorry. Xiao Lu doesn't know any better and offended you. Don't worry, if you have any requests, I'll arrange it for you immediately." The receptionist, named Xiao Lu, stood at the back with her head lowered in fear. She also knew that she had made a mistake. Xiao Lu was on the night shift this week. She didn't know, but Manager Song knew. This ordinary-looking old man in a thin undershirt was the dean of a university. If it was only the dean, it would be fine because there were also many leaders of second-rate colleges and even technical schools who wore the skin of a dean. However, when Chen Zongdai arrived at Chongqing University, the vice-chancellor of Chongqing University personally welcomed him and escorted him to his room. Manager Song, who had witnessed all this, understood that Chen Zongdai's background was definitely not small. If he offended him, not to mention the culprit, Xiao Lu, he might not be able to keep his position as the manager on duty. Chen Zongdai sized up Manager Song and slowly said, "The problem isn't too big, but it's not too small either. However, as a manager, you have to strengthen the ideological education of your employees in the future. How can you judge a book by its cover?" Yes. "You're right," Manager Song nodded and said. Now, no matter who was right or wrong, it was definitely not wrong for him to sincerely admit his mistake first. Chen Zongdai's anger subsided a lot. He nodded and said, "I have a few friends here, and their family happens to be staying in Chongqing for a few days. Take a look and help arrange an empty double room. Don't worry about the cost, we'll pay according to the price." "How can I let you pay for it?" Manager Song laughed and said, "It's during the meeting now, so the guest rooms are not open to the public. There are a lot of empty rooms. I'll get Xiao Lu to arrange it for you immediately. You can stay as long as you want. We'll pay for it." Poplar Fruit didn't want to be greedy for such a small advantage. He said seriously, "After all, they're not teachers here for the meeting. It's not good for them to stay in the guest house for free." When Poplar Fruit said it was not good for them, he was referring to Higashiyama University, which he and Chen Zongdai represented. On the other hand, he himself was quite resistant to such a thing. Chen Zongdai, on the other hand, gave him a look of appreciation. A scholar should have the spirit of not bending over for 5 buckets of rice. This. Manager Song looked at Chen Zongdai awkwardly. Chen Zongdai waved his hand and said, "It's arranged like this. It's okay." Hurry up, I have to meet with your President Ma later. Manager Song had no choice but to ask Xiao Lu at the front desk to find the room key for Xiong Jiwoo and the others. He wanted to make up for it. While hesitating, he took the opportunity to say to Chen Zongdai, President Chen, your friend's family of 6 only wants a double room. It's so crowded. Why don't I arrange another room for you? Anyway, the empty guest rooms are just empty rooms. A family of 6? Chen Zongdai counted in confusion. Then he saw Poplar Fruit's appearance. He laughed and said, No, this is my disciple. He and his daughter are included in the participants. By the way, ask Xiao Lu to help find which room Poplar Fruit is staying in at Higashiyama University. Give him the key. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, There was a misunderstanding just now. Do you need us to go up and get the participation card for you to register? Manager Song was also an official in the guest house. Naturally, he had trained a pair of keen eyes. Poplar Fruit's clothes were not good enough, and his hair and skin were a little dirty. But when he spoke, his temperament was reflected. He was a living copy of Chen Zongdai. In literary terms, they came from the same origin. Manager Song did not dare to be negligent. He laughed and said, No. President Chen has already spoken. Do you think he would lie to me? Xiao Lu, did you hear that? Hurry up and help Brother Yang find his room key. Poplar Fruit, Mui Yang, the fruit of apple. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. In order to make up for the impression in Chen Zongdai's heart, Manager Song personally carried the 2 bags of luggage of the Xiong family and walked forward. Xiao Lu also lowered his head and carried the bag in fear and trepidation, following behind. Xiong Jiwoo had never seen such treatment. He supported his wife on his back with one hand and wanted to snatch the bag with Manager Song with the other.
No.
Maybe Xiong Jiwoo's accent was too heavy, but Manager Song actually judged that he was a meow. He immediately changed to meow and said with a smile, Brother, it's okay. Leave it to us. Please forgive us for the neglect before. Manager Song was also a meow. The world was too small. Xiong Jiwoo could not compete with him. He could only squeeze out a smile and said, Thank you. Poplar Fruit did not care about the little episode between them. He was now holding Kiki in his arms and quickly distancing himself from Chen Zongdai. Grandpa Beard. Kiki did not sleep well yesterday. She had just woken up for a long time before she regained her consciousness. When she recognized Chen Zongdai's appearance, Kiki became excited. She still remembered that Grandpa Beard's beard was soft and comfortable to touch. It was even more comfortable to pull out. When Chen Zongdai saw Kiki, who was baring her fangs and brandishing her claws, his eyes widened. He was so scared that he jumped to the side to protect his beard. Kiki was like a big lion that had just woken up. It was too scary. Chapter 511. After sending them to their room and putting down their luggage, Manager Song and the others tactfully left. The hostel in the university was actually similar to an ordinary motel. There were 2 big beds, a TV in front, a big table, and a balcony outside the floor-to-ceiling window. When the curtains were pulled open, the bright morning sun filled the room. However, such a simple and crude room was already very luxurious for the Xiong family. Including Xiong Jiwoo, they looked around eagerly and carefully. They didn't dare to get close to the bed when they were half a meter away, for fear that the dirt on their bodies would dirty the white sheets. On the contrary, Xiong Xiaofeng was slightly more active. After entering the room, he went straight to the most conspicuous TV in the room and shouted excitedly, TV, TV. There were also 1 or 2 families in the stockade who had a TV, but only a few received it. Xiong Xiaofeng felt that the happiest thing was to go to his friend's house to watch cartoons after dinner. However, Xiong Xiaolin grabbed his hand and frowned. Xiaofeng, don't move. You'll break it. Poplar Fruit felt that Xiong Xiaofeng was much better than Xiong Xiaolin in this regard. Xiong Xiaolin was so sensible that she was like an adult. Children who didn't have any naivety and liveliness would be very tired. Poplar Fruit walked over with a smile and helped Xiong Xiaofeng turn on the TV. Then, he handed the remote control to him and said, It doesn't matter. It's just watching TV. It won't break. Chen Zongdai said. Xiao Xiong, hurry up and tidy up. There's hot water in the bathroom. Take a bath. After a while, we'll take Xiao Yi to the hospital for an examination. Poplar Fruit nodded and said with a smile, yes, you don't have to be so reserved. Use the things in the room if you want to. I also have to go back and tidy up. If you need anything, just find me next door. Just now, Manager Song was very helpful. He asked Xiao Lu to arrange a double room for them on the same floor as Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit and Xiong Jiwu's rooms were only 2 rooms apart. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Xiong Jiwu found it difficult to express his inner gratitude. He spoke incoherently. After sending off Chen Zongdai, Poplar Fruit returned to his room and put down his luggage. Kiki and Gold rolled on the carpet and then struggled to get up. She looked at her father pitifully and said, Papa, Kiki wants to take a bath. Kiki even stretched out her little arms and said, smell it, it stinks. Poplar Fruit knelt down on one knee, smiled and pretended to sniff, and said, how is it smelly? Our Kiki is Princess Xiang Xiang. Even if she doesn't take a bath for 100 days, she will still smell good. Sigh. Kiki wrapped her arms around her father's neck and stomped her feet. She acted coquettishly and said, no, Kiki wants to take a bath. Poplar Fruit was just joking. How could he let Kiki not take a bath for 100 days? He liked his daughter acting coquettishly in front of him the most. Poplar Fruit hugged Kiki with satisfaction, kissed her pink face, and said, well, as you wish, Papa will give you a bath. There was no bathtub in the guest house, so they could only use the shower head. However, the water from the shower head was too strong. Poplar Fruit felt a little stinging when he felt it, let alone Kiki's delicate skin. However, Poplar Fruit still came up with a good idea. He took out a towel and hugged the shower head.
Ah, ha ha.
Kiki stuck out her little, but to let her father apply the shower gel. When she saw Gold poking his head in from the unlocked bathroom door, she immediately screamed. Poplar Fruit didn't know if this little girl was screaming or laughing. Anyway, she was right next to his ear. The high-decibel screams made Poplar Fruit's eardrums tingle, making him feel very uncomfortable. Kiki not only screamed happily but also kicked and punched the water on the floor. Gold was drenched in water and slipped out. However, Poplar Fruit was not spared. His clothes were wet from the splashing water. Little rascal, don't move. Poplar Fruit gently patted Kiki's little butt. Otherwise, I'll spank you. Kiki was a little more well-behaved. After washing up, Poplar Fruit wrapped the naked Kiki in a bath towel and carried her to the bed outside. Chi-Chi twisted her body and crawled out of the bath towel. Her dried hair was scattered in front of her body, her delicate shoulders, and her fair and tender skin. Although she was petite and cute, she also had a bit of the allure of a beauty coming out of the bath. Poplar Fruit pulled the quilt and covered Kiki with it. He smiled and said, Daddy will take a bath first, then I'll help you put on your clothes. Don't move around, do you hear me? Kiki blinked her eyes, her long eyelashes fluttering. She suddenly stuck out her little chest and cutely said, Yes, sir. You have to say yes, Daddy. Poplar Fruit smiled and corrected her. Yes, Daddy. Kiki delicately said with a long voice. Poplar Fruit laughed, took his change of clothes, and went to the bathroom. Before going in, he kicked Gold, who was thinking about jumping on the big bed, into the bathroom. Poplar Fruit had just finished his bath and walked out of the bathroom while drying his hair when he heard a knock on the door. He suspiciously opened the door and looked out. Teacher? The person standing outside the door was indeed Chen Zongdai. Why did you take so long? Chen Zongdai strangely asked. I was bathing Kiki. The little rascal made a fuss for a while. Poplar Fruit apologetically walked to the corridor and then closed the door. I haven't dressed her yet. Teacher, are we going to leave now? How can it be so early? It's only 8 o'clock. Chen Zongdai smiled and said, I know you guys are busy cleaning up, so I brought breakfast for you guys. Is there porridge? Poplar Fruit asked curiously. He smelled the sour and spicy aroma. Yes, I know Kiki only eats porridge, so I brought her a separate portion. Chun Zongdai smiled and said, "This is Chong City's famous hot and sour noodles. Try it." "That's great." Poplar Fruit was overjoyed and said, "I've long wanted to eat a bowl of authentic hot and sour noodles from Chong City. I can't say whether it's authentic or not, but Manager Song from the guest house brought it back from the school staff canteen." Chun Zongdai smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about Xiao Xiong's family. Manager Song has already sent it over." "Oh, right." Chun Zongdai remembered his main purpose. He held a magazine in his left hand and handed it over. He smiled and said, "Your thesis is published on page 37. Take a look when you have time." "It's really published?" Poplar Fruit saw Chun Zongdai turn the page and saw the title of his thesis at first glance. He was overjoyed. Although he had heard about it from his teacher, Poplar Fruit felt that it was unreal before he saw it in person. This was a completely different concept from seeing one's translated work published. Poplar Fruit never dreamed that his dream of being able to publish his thoughts in an authoritative academic journal in the country would come true before he even entered the school. Chapter 5:12. Poplar Fruit, who could not suppress his excitement, walked into the room. He did not help Kiki put on her clothes. Instead, he held the magazine and flipped to his page to read. In fact, there was nothing to read. Poplar Fruit could have memorized the entire article upside down, but he still read it once. What he wanted was the spontaneous sense of accomplishment. As he read, Poplar Fruit felt a slippery little person sneak into his arms. He looked down and found that the naked Kiki had unknowingly climbed out of the quilt. Kiki saw that her father did not respond to her. She was very puzzled. What was more attractive than Kiki? "You'll catch a cold if you don't put on clothes." Poplar Fruit did not know that he was the one to blame the most. He smiled and patted Kiki's head. He stood up and took out a set of clean clothes for Kiki to change into. Considering the time, Poplar Fruit did not call. Instead, he sent a text message to Fong Bebe to let her know that he was safe. Fong Bebe quickly replied, "I'm in class. It's good that you're here. Talk to you in the evening." Poplar Fruit's thoughts were very imaginative. After having breakfast with Kiki, he ran to Chun Zongdai's room to drop in. "Professor, I have something to ask you." "What is it?" Chun Zongdai was sitting on a chair in the room, reading a book. He looked up at Poplar Fruit and gently took off the reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. "Is it because your editor's note is too plain?" "That's because your paper was recommended by me. However, it is a new theory that has not been rigorously verified. No editor would dare to give you a high evaluation if it was in their hands." Chun Zongdai said solemnly, "Therefore, the challenge you will face will be great. Not everyone can accept such radical thinking." Poplar Fruit was stunned. He did not consider this problem. The editor's note did not have any guidance for Poplar Fruit. Would his own article and his own ideas be changed by other people's opinions? Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, "Professor, this is not what I want to talk to you about." "Then what is it?" Chun Zongdai was also stunned. He did not know that his apprentice was so thick-skinned. The meeting was tomorrow, and Poplar Fruit had to go on stage to give a report. Chun Zongdai had arranged it. Otherwise, it would not be his turn. He was not worried at all. "I want to ask, doesn't our school have a graduate student teaching group?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Chun Zongdai did not know why Poplar Fruit asked this question. He gently nodded. Poplar Fruit continued, "I heard that our students went to the remote west to teach. Is it possible that they came to Guishan province to teach? There are many primary schools in Guishan province that do not have teachers." This question had been hovering in Poplar Fruit's mind ever since Xiong Xiaolin told him the story of the old teacher. It was difficult for children in the mountains to go to school. However, when they overcame many difficulties and longed to be able to study, the school became an empty room. Poplar Fruit had thought of asking the local government for help. However, he remembered that the old teacher was a model worker. He had been running around for many years. Poplar Fruit believed that he could only sigh and go back. Therefore, he turned his hope to the school's graduate student teaching group. Of course, Poplar Fruit could also participate in teaching. However, it was impossible for him to solve this problem by himself. Poplar Fruit also had his own life. It was impossible for him to stay in the mountains for a long time. The possibility is not high. Chen Zongdai understood the meaning of his apprentice's question. He shook his head and said, "The location of the teaching group is relatively fixed. It is in the difficult western areas like Tibet and Qinghai. It is unlikely that they will go to the Hmong village that you mentioned." "I know, they are responding to the call of the country." Poplar Fruit did not give up and said, "But didn't you say before?
The rules are set by people.
There are also many children in Guishan who need help." Poplar Fruit, this is not a problem of the Hmong village. It is not a problem that you can solve alone. Chen Zongdai sighed and said, "The unequal distribution of educational resources is a big problem that the country is facing. In recent years, fewer and fewer students from the countryside pass the entrance examination. Most of them are students from the city. It was also published in the newspaper. However, the war of words has been going on for several years, and it still can't be solved. Then we can't sit back and do nothing." Poplar Fruit frowned and said, "Everyone should pay more attention to it and think about countermeasures. Maybe it can really be solved?" Chen Zongdai smiled and said, "It is useless to be anxious with me now. The country called for support in Tibet decades ago, let alone in recent years. However, Tibet is still the same. The conditions there are much more difficult than Guishan. No one went with the support of the policy. Without the support of the policy, it was even more difficult. This was the current situation of the children in the mountains." Poplar Fruit felt a little helpless when he thought of this. He sighed and said, "But it can't go on like this. Learning is their only way out. Without knowledge and skills, they can only follow the old path of their parents. Is this vicious cycle going to continue?" Chen Zongdai shook his head slightly and said, "The country will not let it go like this. Wait patiently." Poplar Fruit did not think so. Now the government used GDP as the only standard for political performance assessment. From top to bottom, every official put their attention on economic development, which was the most likely to be successful. Who would pay attention to the future of this small group of people? At the age of 15, it was almost the age of high school in the city, but Xiong Xiaolin had just graduated from primary school. At the same time, there were more children behind her who could not go to school. How could they compete with the children in the city? If they let it go, the future of Xiong Xiaolin and the other children in the mountains would be destroyed day by day. However, Poplar Fruit also saw the reality. Life in the mountains was so difficult that no teacher would give up the comfortable life in the city to teach the children. As for teaching, even Poplar Fruit was reluctant to spend the most precious years of his life here. If he put himself in the shoes of others, the outcome was not difficult to imagine. Although he was still flustered, Poplar Fruit did not discuss this issue with Chen Zongdai again. He talked to Chen Zongdai about tonight's banquet and tomorrow's meeting, and then he left. Poplar Fruit took Kiki with his little tail. He did not go directly to the room. He went to the double room, where the 4 members of the Xiong family lived. "Hello, Uncle Poplar Fruit." The one who opened the door was very sensible Xiong Xiaolin. Xiong Jiwu had just taken care of his wife and 2 children, and it was his turn to take a bath. When Poplar Fruit saw the English textbook in Xiong Xiaolin's hand, he smiled at her bitterly. Xiong Xiaolin did not change the channel to watch TV with her brother. Instead, she obediently reviewed the phonetic symbols that Poplar Fruit taught her in the morning. It was not difficult for Poplar Fruit to imagine her thoughts, because this was also what Poplar Fruit looked forward to when he was in the Miao Stockade village. Seeing the big world outside, Xiong Xiaolin was more eager to find a way to enter the big city through reading. There were many children like her, but they had already lost at the starting line. They needed to put in more effort to chase after them, which was unimaginable to ordinary people. This was not fair. Chapter 5:13. Vice Principal Ma of Chongqing University only arrived at 10 a.m. with Shanshan. He was accompanied by 6 well-dressed people and looked like a big shot. However, if he was just visiting an old friend, his attitude was a little too much. When Poplar Fruit was in the foreign trade business, he was humble when he met people like this. His every move was careful, and he was afraid that he would say something wrong. However, now that he had become more powerful, Poplar Fruit's attitude had changed. However, even though his attitude had changed, Poplar Fruit did not show any disgust. He maintained an attitude that was neither servile nor overbearing as he followed behind his teacher with a dignified manner. Chen Zhongdai, on the other hand, was used to it. He greeted him with a smile and chatted enthusiastically with Vice Principal Ma. "Come, Poplar Fruit, let me introduce you. This is Vice Principal Ma of Chongqing University." After the greetings, Chen Zhongdai pulled Poplar Fruit over and smiled. "Old Ma, this is my new student. He will be studying under me this year." "Nice to meet you, Vice Principal Ma," Poplar Fruit said loudly. "Nice to meet you, nice to meet you," Vice Principal Ma replied in surprise. He knew his old classmate's personality. He was knowledgeable and proud at the same time. He was known for his high standards and strictness in his studies. Vice Principal Ma had never seen him try so hard to introduce a junior to him. No, Chen Zhongdai was talking about a graduate student. Since when did it become his turn to teach a graduate student? He could barely teach a few doctoral students in a year. Vice Principal Ma looked at Poplar Fruit differently. He muttered in his heart, "Could it be that he's from some family? His background is strong enough." "Your Poplar Fruit?" Vice Principal Ma did not have much of a reaction when he heard this name. However, the two people behind him shouted in unison. Vice Principal Ma turned his head and asked curiously, "And Dean Luo, Little Yang too?" Vice Principal Ma's major was not in the field of linguistics and translation. Moreover, he focused on administrative affairs and had not read academic journals for many years. I've long heard of it, long heard of it." Dean Qian, who was slightly older, chuckled. He didn't say much. Dean Luo, who was slightly younger, had a more violent temper. He sneered and said, "How could I not know him? From this month onwards, I'm afraid the name Poplar Fruit will be famous all over the country, right?" If this sentence was said in a different tone, it would be a compliment. However, Dean Luo's tone was obviously strange, making people feel uncomfortable when they heard it. Poplar Fruit frowned slightly. He looked at Director Luo and saw disdain in his eyes. It was as if he was a clown in Director Luo's eyes. Before Vice Principal Ma could speak, Dean Qian was also shocked by Director Luo's words. He quickly pulled Director Luo from behind and tried to smooth things over with a smile. Poplar Fruit is Director Chen's disciple. It's natural for him to be famous. Ha ha. After saying that, he secretly glared at Director Luo. He was very dissatisfied with Director Luo's recklessness. No matter how uncomfortable he felt, he could vent it in private. However, he could not mess around in front of Vice Principal Ma. If the situation became too tense, where would Vice Principal Ma's face go? Vice Principal Ma looked at Poplar Fruit thoughtfully. He smiled and changed the topic with Chen Zhongdai. Poplar Fruit followed behind them and sat down. Actually, he did not want to pretend to be polite with Vice Principal Ma. His heart had already flown to Kiki's side. Kiki was now under Xiong Xiaolin's care. My daughter and I were watching TV in the room. Originally, Poplar Fruit's computer was broken and did not have time to buy a new one. However, unexpectedly, the children's channel was also broadcasting Pleasant Goat. Hence, Kiki was still sitting there calmly. However, even if he did not want to, Poplar Fruit still had to put on an act. After all, this was Shurcheng. They were in other people's territory. Moreover, they had to trouble them to arrange for Yi Nuzhang's hospitalization. Poplar Fruit had to put in some effort. Because there were outsiders around, Vice Principal Ma and Chen Zhongdai did not talk about their personal relationship. Instead, they talked about the seminar. After listening for a while, Poplar Fruit realized that such a small seminar was actually so important to Shurcheng University. Chongqing University wasn't very well known. It was rare for them to be able to hold a national high-level seminar. In order to hold this seminar well and let the professors and scholars from Beijing, Sorcery City, and other big cities see the glory of Chongqing University, the teachers and students had worked together and prepared for more than a month. I still have to go and pick up Vice Principal Zhu from Beijing University later. Vice Principal Ma lowered his voice and said with a hint of complaint. Picking up Vice Principal Zhu from the airport and visiting his old classmate were two different things. Vice Principal Zhu from Beijing University was much more valuable than a vice principal from a university that ranked lower than him. Therefore, Vice Principal Ma naturally did not dare to neglect Vice Principal Zhu's arrival. That means that your preparation this time was very successful. Chen Zhongdai smiled and comforted Vice Principal Ma. Even old Zhu is here. I didn't expect him to come. He rarely attended seminars in the past. If you are busy, you don't have to accompany me. Hurry up and do your work. Chen Zhongdai smiled and said, I also have a patient here. I have to send him to the hospital for a checkup later. You told me yesterday. I didn't forget. Vice Principal Ma smiled and pointed at Chen Zhongdai. Don't worry. I will definitely make arrangements for you before I go. He took out a piece of paper from his suit jacket pocket. There was a number written on it. He said, This is Dr. Liao from the 3rd Affiliated Hospital. I told him this morning to give him a call before you go. He will make the necessary arrangements for you. After Vice Principal Ma left, the group of people following him also left. When they left, only Director Luo gave Poplar Fruit a strange look. This made Poplar Fruit feel a little strange. What did I do to offend you? Poplar Fruit muttered in his heart. Chen Zhongdai saw the way he looked at Director Luo's back. He waited until there was no one else, then laughed softly and said, Don't worry about that guy with the surname Luo. Although he is the vice principal of the School of Foreign Languages of Chong City University, he is not very good. I guess he was upset when he saw that you published an article on translator genius at such a young age. Poplar Fruit shook his head slightly. He did not take this matter to heart. He actually wanted to ask Chong City University about the issue of volunteer teaching. However, looking at the situation, he guessed that he would get a more bureaucratic answer. There were still a few days before the seminar. Poplar Fruit was not in a hurry. His top priority today was to send Yi Nozang to the hospital for treatment. This illness could not be delayed any longer. Fortunately, the teacher had already made arrangements for Poplar Fruit. Chapter 514. Yi Nozang was admitted to the 3rd Affiliated Hospital of Chongqing University very smoothly, but Poplar Fruit and the others were still stopped by the upright old doctor at the door and scolded. Do you know that if you sent her here 3 days later, you wouldn't have to send her here? You can just wait at home to collect her corpse. Do you know what it means to save a life, like putting out a fire? The old doctor's mouth was very vicious. He completely ignored Dr. Liao, who was looking at him with a bitter face, and scolded him. You didn't perform the operation immediately after the diagnosis was made in the hospital, and the minor illness was delayed until it became a serious illness. If you delayed any longer, she would be gone. Is there any family member like you, leaving your wife at home to suffer? Although Poplar Fruit's clothes weren't from a famous brand, they were still good goods that cost at least 600 yuan. Looking at the material and style, one could tell that the price was not cheap. As a result, he made the old doctor mistakenly think that the Xiong family was very rich, but they didn't care about women's illnesses. Sigh. After Poplar Fruit walked out, he still sighed with lingering fear. Wasn't he just here to send someone for treatment? He was even scolded in the face. Chen Zhongdai was really lucky. He had something to do and didn't accompany him to the hospital. Otherwise, the two grumpy old men would have quarreled. Papa, that Grandpa Bai is so fierce. Kiki also pulled her father's clothes and said in fear. The old doctor's surname was not Bai. The Bai that Kiki said referred to his white coat. But fortunately, Yi Nozang's illness hadn't caused a big disaster yet. After the hospital checked, they immediately arranged the operation. The speed of the surgery was so fast that it took only an hour for the not-so-small surgery to be completed. The operation effect of Yi Nozang's operation was very good. Although she had just been anesthetized and hadn't completely left, the benign tumor in her abdominal cavity had been taken out. The old doctor was very satisfied. He was worried that the tumor would mutate. At that time, there would be no way to save her. Yi Nozang didn't have any big problems, but she still had to stay in the hospital for a few days, so Xiongju stayed in the hospital to accompany her and Poplar Fruit left with the children. Poplar Fruit suddenly became the leader of the children. He walked in the middle with Kiki in his arms. Xiong Xiaofeng, who looked like a bird that escaped from a cage, was walking in front of him and Xiong Xiaolin behind. The three children's personalities were very different. Chi-Chi liked to chatter away with her father. She was like 100,000 wise. As long as she saw something that she was interested in, her questions would come flooding in like a tsunami. Xiong Xiaolin's, Xiong, and Xiong Xiaolin's family. After he went to the hospital, he didn't. He only in the morning for a while, Xiong. He had only had in the morning for a while. He for the hospital, he's. It was as if the whole world was new to him. The bus stop, the green trees standing neatly by the roadside, and the young students passing by on bicycles, all attracted Xiong Xiaofeng's attention. He couldn't wait to touch everything he saw. For this, Poplar Fruit had to stop him. Otherwise, this guy would not only touch but also put his head into the roadside trash can. In comparison, Xiong Xiaolin was much more shy. She always had a sense of inferiority in her heart. She followed behind Poplar Fruit shyly. Sometimes, she didn't pay attention when Poplar Fruit talked to her because he didn't want to leave her out. Xiong Xiaolin had been trying to reduce her presence, but Poplar Fruit didn't want her to do that. Let's go buy new clothes. Xiaofeng, you should wear new clothes. Don't always wear meow clothes. Poplar Fruit suggested with a smile. Kiki, what do you think? Okay. Kiki wriggled in front of her father's chest happily. She cried, Kiki wants to buy a new dress too. Kiki wants to buy a new dress. Xiong Xiaofeng didn't answer. His eager expression had already told Poplar Fruit the answer. Xiong Xiaolin hesitated and said, Uncle, I'm sorry to ask you to spend money again. It's just a few clothes. Your Uncle Poplar Fruit can still afford it. Poplar Fruit smiled and pulled the two little guys into the taxi. Under the taxi driver's kind reminder, Poplar Fruit didn't go to the shopping mall in the university town as planned. There were no children's clothes for sale there. They left the university town and went to the nearest department store. Xiong Xiaofeng was dazzled by the dazzling lineup of goods in the supermarket. Xiong Xiaolin quickly took her brother's hand. Seeing these beautifully decorated shops with floor-to-ceiling glass, her heart was still in a mess. She was worried that the reckless Xiong Xiaofeng would accidentally break the things in the shops. In that case, she wouldn't be able to afford it even if she sold herself. Xiong Xiaolin felt inferior again. Kiki, her father, and several aunts went shopping many times. She also practiced discerning eyes. Just turning her head and looking around, she glanced at the shop that specialized in selling children's clothes. Papa.
There.
Kiki happily patted her father's clothes and pointed to the shop she liked. Because Poplar Fruit and Kiki were dressed in extraordinary temperament, the two little tails behind them were not treated coldly by the salespeople of the big shopping mall who were used to judging people by their appearance. When Poplar Fruit was choosing a princess dress for Kiki to attend the banquet tonight, they were also trying to recommend new clothes to the Xiong siblings. No need, thank you, sister. We're just looking. At this time, it was her sister who made the decision. Xiong Xiaolin waved her hand in embarrassment and said politely, What do you mean no need? You and this sister look at the clothes. Later, we'll buy them together. Poplar Fruit took the time to turn his head and smiled. He was worried that the two children were too shy to pick, so he said to the sales lady, Little sister, help them pick a few clothes to try. If they fit well, we'll buy them together. With Poplar Fruit's promise, the sales lady's spirit rose. She smiled and took the two children to pick clothes. Xiong Xiaolin had been shy, but after being praised by her flowery words, she also picked up a set of girls' clothes and ran to the dressing room to change. Beautiful. When Xiong Xiaofeng and Xiong Xiaolin took turns to come out of the dressing room, Poplar Fruit smiled and clapped his hands. It was not to say that it was beautiful. After all, it was the first time for them to try on clothes. Even if Xiong Xiaolin was born beautiful, it was a bit awkward to wear the city children's youthful clothes. However, Poplar Fruit still had to praise them to give them confidence. Papa, where's Kiki? Kiki, who had changed into a beautiful fluffy white dress, had just run to the mirror to show off. She heard her father praise the other children, so she quickly twisted her little butt and ran back and said with jealousy. Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's little head, laughed, and said, "You're the most beautiful. Later, I'll find you a beautiful crown. Our Kiki is also a little princess." Chapter 5:15. In the children's clothing store, Poplar Fruit bought 3 sets of clothes for the Xiong siblings. He even let them change on the spot and put the old clothes into a bag. Xiong Xiaolin felt that it was inappropriate. At first, she didn't want Poplar Fruit to buy clothes for her mother. She said that Poplar Fruit had already forked out more than 30,000 yuan for her mother's surgery and hospitalization fees. She couldn't let Poplar Fruit spend money to buy clothes for them. After Xiong Xiaolin said that, even though Xiong Xiaofeng was reluctant, he still put the clothes back. "You treat me as an uncle. It's natural for an uncle to buy a few new clothes for his nephew and niece. What's wrong with that?" Yang was smiled and patted their heads. In the end, she still bought the clothes, not allowing them to refuse. Under Chen Zongdai's repeated urging, Poplar Fruit and the rest took a taxi back to the university town. After returning to the room, Poplar Fruit asked, "Xiaolin, Xiaofeng, do you want to stay in the guest house tonight, or do you want me to send you to the hospital to accompany your mother? Uncle is bringing Kiki to participate in an activity tonight. We might be back later." "Uncle, I want to go too," Xiong Xiaofeng said longingly. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said awkwardly, "Not today. Tonight's matter is more important. It's not convenient to bring you along. Tomorrow, Uncle will be free tomorrow night. I'll bring you out to play." Xiong Xiaolin pulled her brother and said softly, "Uncle, you go ahead. We're fine. We'll just stay in the guest house." "Don't you want to go to the hospital to visit your mother?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Xiong Xiaolin shook her head and said, "We won't go tonight. Mom has to rest after the operation. If we go to the hospital, Dad will have to take care of us. It's better not to trouble him." "What a sensible child." Poplar Fruit nodded in his heart. He smiled and said, "Since that's the case, then you two should stay in the guest house obediently. Xiaolin, you're the big sister now. You have to look after your brother and not run around. Otherwise, Uncle and your father will be very sad if we can't find you." Xiong Xiaolin puffed out her chest and nodded seriously. Poplar Fruit patted Xiong Xiaofeng's head, who looked like a wilted eggplant, and comforted him with a smile. "Xiaofeng, don't you like to watch TV? Uncle will teach you how to use the remote control. Tonight, you will stay in your room and watch TV, okay? Oh, by the way, Jinzi will also stay in the guest house." Poplar Fruit kicked Gold, who sat up at the foot of the bed when he heard his name, and said with a smile, "Please take care of him, Xiaolin." "Papa, Gold. Gold is Kiki's." Hearing that Poplar Fruit wanted Gold to stay in Xiong Xiaolin's room, Kiki became anxious. "Daddy knows." Poplar Fruit smiled and comforted Kiki, who was sometimes generous, but sometimes narrow-minded. He said, "Gold can't go with us." But, Kiki squatted down, hugged Goldie's head, and looked at her father pitifully. "But what?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "How about, Kiki, you also stay in the room with Sister Xiaolin and Gold. Daddy will go out by himself, okay?"
"No," Kiki cried.
She quickly got up from Gold, waved her small hands, and rushed to her father. "Kiki wants to be with Papa." Poplar Fruit laughed happily. He laughed a little proudly, because he once again proved that in Kiki's heart, her father would always be the first. This time, of course, Chen Zongdai was not the only one who came to Higashiyama University. In addition to Chen Zongdai and his master, there was also Huang Xueyu, the dean of the faculty, and a student assistant accompanying them. The student assistant was called Zhu Jingjing, and she was also a graduate student. However, she did not have the same good treatment as Poplar Fruit. She was not qualified to attend the banquet in the evening. Zhu Jingjing knew about Poplar Fruit's existence. She had already heard about Poplar Fruit when he first started to study with Chen Zongdai. Then, after one semester, Poplar Fruit's extraordinary progress had already made Zhu Jingjing numb. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit was the only such person in the world. Otherwise, how could other people live? The other people's impression of Poplar Fruit in the school went from being skeptical to being skeptical. When Chen Zhongdai recommended his thesis to be published in Translation Expert and the news came out that Poplar Fruit was successfully published, everyone finally recognized Poplar Fruit. Including Zhu Jingjing, she also went from being an anti-fan to a fan and secretly listed Poplar Fruit as her idol. Therefore, Poplar Fruit asked her to take care of the two children when she was free in the guest house. Zhu Jingjing agreed, without hesitation. After seeing Poplar Fruit and Kiki, Chen Zhongdai laughed and joked, "You're dressed so handsomely. Tiskitheske, this old man is embarrassed to take you out." Poplar Fruit was indeed handsome. He was wearing a slim-fit black suit, with perfectly ironed black trousers and shiny black leather shoes that perfectly displayed Poplar Fruit's long legs. Kiki, who was in his arms, was wearing a pale pink patterned white princess dress. The combination of the two was like a luminous pearl in the night sky, eye-catching.
Ah,
Poplar Fruit thought it was true and scratched his head. He said embarrassedly, "Then I'll go back and change." "No need, Poplar Fruit, your teacher is just teasing you." The head of the faculty, Huang Shuiyu, pulled Poplar Fruit and laughed. "Director, you're really too much. We're already so old. How can we compare to young people?" "That's true. We two old men look the same no matter what we wear." Chen Zhongdai laughed and said, "In the future, the world will still belong to the young people." "Teacher," Poplar Fruit said speechlessly, "you're still young. In another 10 years, the world will still be yours." Poplar Fruit chatted happily with the two teachers, especially Huang Shuiyu, as they went to the University of Chongqing's business hotel, where the banquet was held. Huang Shuiyu's friendship with Poplar Fruit was earlier than Chen Zhongdai's. When Poplar Fruit was still an undergraduate student, Huang Shuiyu had taught Poplar Fruit. However, at that time, Huang Shuiyu didn't expect Poplar Fruit to improve so quickly. Judging from the paper published by Poplar Fruit's achievements had already surpassed most of the teachers in the faculty. "Don't be in a hurry to praise him. Poplar Fruit, don't get carried away," Chen Zhongdai interrupted. "Old Huang, you must not have taken Poplar Fruit's paper seriously." "I read it," Huang Shuiyu said unhappily. "It's a new theory. When I read it, I was shocked."
who are you talking about?
"So bold. Then why are you so excited?" Chen Zhongdai didn't forget to sound the alarm for Poplar Fruit. "Poplar Fruit, as I said before, when this paper is published, you have to be mentally prepared to be questioned. Tomorrow, no. Maybe tonight, there will be people looking for you to debate." Poplar Fruit nodded and said, "Yes, I know. What are you afraid of?" Huang Shuiyu said loudly, "In my opinion, Xiao Yang's theory is epoch-making. Those who question it are just jealous and short-sighted. Xiao Yang, don't be afraid. You still have your teacher and Higashiyama University to support you." Poplar Fruit nodded gratefully. Chapter 516. Poplar Fruit had thought about the possibility of being questioned, but he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Poplar Fruit? He's Poplar Fruit? This was the second time he heard this sentence today, but it was far more intense than the first time. This was at the entrance of the hotel, where the banquet was held. When Poplar Fruit and the others signed in, a teacher from an unknown university behind Poplar Fruit saw the two big words written by Poplar Fruit and shouted, without suppressing his voice. Then, one word spread to two to three, and Poplar Fruit's name instantly ignited a heated discussion among the crowd at the entrance of the hotel. Although there weren't many people, only 5 or 6 people in groups of 2s and 3s. Including those who came later, there were no more than 10 people. However, they were whispering to each other and discussing in front of Yanghua. "That's the madman? What madman? I think it's just a clickbait. I don't know what the translator is thinking by publishing such a deviant article." They were discussing and looking at Poplar Fruit with malicious eyes. For a moment, the atmosphere at the entrance of the hotel was particularly strange. "You're Poplar Fruit?" At this time, A short and thin man came out of the crowd and walked in front of Poplar Fruit. He looked up at Poplar Fruit disdainfully and said, "You don't look old. You've only been studying for a few years, yet you dare to talk nonsense on the translator." Poplar Fruit frowned. He felt a little uncomfortable when he heard this, but he was still a newcomer in this field, so it wasn't good for him to go against these seniors. He took a deep breath and asked, "How should I address you, senior?" "Shaman University, Wang Kaiga." The short and thin man said arrogantly. "Hello, Teacher Wang." Poplar Fruit said lightly. His tone was neither humble nor overbearing. "I don't know why you think I'm talking nonsense. The Translator is a rigorous academic newspaper, not an entertainment tabloid that anyone can talk nonsense on. I publish my thoughts on it because I wanted to share my research results with everyone."
Ha!
Wang Kaiga sneered and said, "You're young, and you dare to claim that you have research results without studying for a few years. Before you conjecture these unrealistic theories, have you seriously read other people's works? Do you know that your theory doesn't work at all? You're not a fish. How do you know that I haven't studied the theoretical works of my seniors? How do you know that my theory doesn't work if you don't test it? If you think that my theory is wrong, can you give me a few examples?" He felt that Poplar Fruit's thesis was nonsense, but he had to nitpick. Wang Kaiga, who hadn't carefully studied Poplar Fruit's thesis, was at a loss for words. Wang Kaiga said angrily, "I'm a professor at Shaman University. What's your title? In terms of age and seniority, I can be considered your teacher. Is it your turn to lecture me? If you're his teacher, then what am I?" Chen Zongdai slowly walked out from behind Poplar Fruit. He had just signed in with Huang Shuiyu and walked forward, but after waiting for a long time, he didn't see Poplar Fruit come over. It was only when he heard Wang Kaiga shout that he knew that Poplar Fruit was in trouble. When Wang Kaiga saw Chen Zongdai, he was so shocked that he couldn't speak clearly. Director Chen. Chen Zongdai's reputation in the field of linguistics was very high. Although it wasn't a high-ranking comprehensive university, he and Mr. Yuan Qinghe, the director of the School of Advanced Studies of Guangdong Foreign Studies University, and Mr. Du Wenqing of Xiamen University of Chinese Studies were recognized as the leaders of South China. They were even among the top 10 linguists in the country. Wang Kaiga was only an associate professor. He bragged that he was a professor. When he saw Chen Zongdai, a giant in the academic world, he naturally felt that he was half a level lower. Director Chen. The surrounding people who were watching the show also exclaimed in low voices. "Yeah, I remember now." According to the editor, Poplar Fruit's thesis was recommended by Director Chen. A person who had read carefully quickly explained to the people next to him. Could Director Chen be Poplar Fruit's mentor? Hee. Teacher Wang seems to have hit an iron plate. There was no lack of people who were gloating. Poplar Fruit is your student?" Wang Kaiga didn't give up and pointed at Poplar Fruit. "He is my student," Chen Zongdai said concisely. "But aren't you from the functional language school? Why are you?" Wang Kaiga didn't continue. His question was very good, and it was what everyone was thinking. "Can't I? I didn't say that I agree with Poplar Fruit's theory." Chen Zongdai shrugged his shoulders and said, "But that doesn't stop Yonghua from being my student. The truth is that the more you debate, the clearer it becomes. We allow and hope for different voices so that our linguistics can develop. If he was your student, why didn't you say so earlier?" Wang Kaiga felt very aggrieved. He wanted to say, "You should have made a clear stand against it. Is there a teacher like you? Your student has already gone against you, and you still allow him to put forward a theory to oppose you?" Wang Kaiga's companions shrank back. The representative sent by Xiamen University didn't have enough weight. They didn't even have a chance to speak in front of Chen Zongdai. Naturally, they didn't dare to provoke him. "I'm not shielding him. Don't misunderstand." Chen Zongdai looked around and chuckled. "If anyone has different opinions about Poplar Fruit, you can raise them. This is also a good thing for Poplar Fruit. However, I hope that when you raise your opinions, you really find the problem. Then, everyone can communicate in a friendly manner. Teacher Wang, what do you say?" Chen Zongdai stood up for his disciple. Wang Kaiga didn't dare to say anything else. He laughed dryly and nodded. Yes, Director Chen, you are right. Chen Zhongdai didn't argue. He smiled and nodded. Then, he patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder, turned around, and walked into the hotel first. Poplar Fruit held Kiki, bowed politely to Wang Kaiga, and said, Professor Wang, I'm also going in. Do you think we should talk at another time? You are my senior. I still have to learn from you. These words were actually to give Wang Kaiga a way out. However, there was still a needle hidden in the silk floss. Poplar Fruit was unceremoniously mocking Wang Kaiga. If he had known that Poplar Fruit was Chen Zhongdai's student, Wang Kaiga wouldn't have stood out. Damn it, I thought he was a soft persimmon that could be pinched at will. At this time, Wang Kaiga just wanted to get rid of Poplar Fruit as soon as possible. He laughed dryly and said yes repeatedly. Wang Kaiga squeezed into the crowd as if he was escaping. Poplar Fruit still had a calm expression. He turned around and walked into the hotel, leaving the silent crowd outside. Chapter 5:17. Generally, a seminar was just a dinner party. There were dozens of tables, and like-minded old pedants who had topics to talk about or were already familiar with each other would sit together to eat and chat. However, this time the venue of the seminar was historically moved from a few big coastal cities to an inland city. Chongqing University had ingeniously arranged a banquet that was more like a cocktail party before the start of the conference. This was to show that although Chongqing University was located inland, it still had a strong capital. Let's not talk about the purpose of this cocktail party. After Poplar Fruit and the others entered, they found that there were already many people standing inside. They were all men in suits and leather shoes, and the women were all dressed up. It was as if they were really there. In fact, it was not difficult to understand. As translators, except for the poorer translators, most interpreters were required to wear formal clothes when they were translating or even translating at conferences. Similarly, interpreters were often able to get an admission ticket for the cocktail party after the conference. Therefore, they were not unfamiliar with events like cocktail parties. Those who were able to walk into this venue were all people who had a certain level of attainment in linguistics or translation theory. Most of them were professors. With their abilities, the work of translating was naturally not a problem. Therefore, it could be seen that they were not at a loss when facing the cocktail party like the newcomers. They gathered in twos and threes, holding wine glasses and chatting while waiting for the cocktail party to begin. Poplar Fruit knew that it was not appropriate to bring Kiki to this kind of occasion, but Chen Zhongdai was very domineering. He waved his hand and said that it was fine. Poplar Fruit naturally did not want to leave Kiki alone at home, so he brought her along. However, in order to not cause public outrage, he kept a low profile and led Kiki around the edge of the venue. Papa, I want to see. I want to see. Kiki was too short. She stood on tiptoe on the ground and could not see the buffet food on the table. However, when she heard her father's praise, she could not hold back her emotions and pulled Poplar Fruit's trousers and shouted, "Shh, lower your voice." With the Poplar Fruit by his mouth, he raised his index finger. Seeing this, Kiki shrank her neck and pretended to look around. Poplar Fruit picked up Kiki and watched the food with her daughter. Since the banquet had not officially started, they could only watch but not eat. This is a river clam. We have it everywhere, but I have never seen such a big one. It is almost as big as an oyster. Poplar Fruit pointed at the food and taught Kiki how to identify it. Everyone else was looking for acquaintances to chat with, but Poplar Fruit didn't have many acquaintances. He hid with his daughter in a corner to entertain himself. "Papa, what's that red thing?" Kiki glanced at the seasoning plate next to the clam plate and asked curiously. "It's chili noodles." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Kiki doesn't like spicy food, right?" Kiki pouted and shook her head. She said with a disgusted look, "Papa, let's throw it away, okay? Kiki doesn't like spicy food. It's so uncomfortable." Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's back with a smile and comforted her. "Don't be afraid. Dad won't let you eat spicy food. Don't worry. Throw it away? You can't throw it away. Others want to eat it." Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit. Why are you hiding here? At this time, The dean Huang Shuiyu hurried over and said with a little blame, "Come with me. The dean is looking for you." "Looking for me?" Poplar Fruit held his daughter and followed Huang Shuiyu. He asked curiously, "Isn't the teacher chatting with a friend?" "Just now, Dean Yuan from UI asked about you. The dean wanted to introduce you to him, but you disappeared." "Hurry up," Huang Shuiyu said hurriedly. "Dean Yuan? From Guangdong?" Poplar Fruit didn't remember when he heard this, but soon he connected it with a person in his memory. Dean Yuan Qinghe of Guangdong Foreign Studies University. Last year, when Yanghua was suddenly exposed for translating sect leader Qiao's autobiography, she was caught in a storm of public opinion. At that time, it was Dean Yuan Qinghe's evaluation in the newspaper that gradually made Yanghua accepted by the public. At that time, Poplar Fruit was still a nobody, and Chen Zongdai didn't know who Poplar Fruit was. Of course, Dean Yuan didn't know him either. It was Yao Dehua who spent a lot of effort and favors to invite this great god. Dean Yuan also gave a fair evaluation based on some of the translations that Poplar Fruit had already done. At that time, he undoubtedly helped Poplar Fruit a lot. But even so, Poplar Fruit's social and academic status at that time couldn't be compared to Dean Yuan. So, Poplar Fruit wanted to visit and thank him, but he was rejected. He could only remember this kindness in his heart. Poplar Fruit thought of this and couldn't help but quicken his pace.
Teacher.
When Poplar Fruit walked to Chen Zongdai's side, he saw Dean Yuan Qinghe, a white-haired old man. Compared to Chen Zongdai's hale and hearty spirit, he was a bit old. Of course, Dean Yuan Qinghe's age was here. He was in his 70s this year and was rehired after retirement. Chen Zongdai was even younger than Dean Yuan. So, even though Chen Zongdai and Dean Yuan Qinghe's status in the academic world were comparable, Chen Zongdai still maintained a humble attitude when facing Dean Yuan Qinghe. "Poplar Fruit, let me introduce you." Chen Zongdai pulled Poplar Fruit and said, "This is Dean Yuan Qinghe. I don't need to say anything else. You must have heard of his name, right?" "How could I not have heard of him?" Dean Yuan is a treasure in Guangdong province. Poplar Fruit put Kiki on the ground and let her stand on her own. Then, he humbly bowed to Dean Yuan Qinghe and said with some excitement, "Dean Yuan, I often heard of your name when I was studying. Last year, I also needed your help. Today, I finally have the opportunity to meet you. Poplar Fruit wants to add a word of thanks to you." Compared to Huang Shuiyu, who was confused, Chen Zongdai knew the story between Poplar Fruit and Dean Yuan Qinghe. He laughed and said, "Right, I forgot. Sigh, I should have brought Poplar Fruit to thank you a long time ago." Yuan Qinghe smiled lightly. His whole body exuded the indifference of a master. He waved his hand and said, "No need. I was also entrusted by someone to say a few words of justice." "Your words of justice saved me a lot of scolding." Poplar Fruit straightened up and smiled calmly. "It's only right to thank you." Poplar Fruit's voice was very steady, unlike the other students who stuttered when they saw these famous old professors. Yuan Qinghe took a deep look at Poplar Fruit, then smiled meaningfully at Chen Zongdai. "Little Chen, you're lucky to have picked a good seedling." Yuan Qinghe did not say that Chen Zongdai had a good eye. Instead, he used the word luck. The meaning behind his words was obvious. It was nothing more than Chen Zongdai's luck. If Poplar Fruit had studied in another university, how could this guy, who is usually very lazy in recruiting students, have gotten in?
Hee.
Chen Zongdai laughed proudly. Looking for monthly votes, looking for recommendations. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 518. It's a pity that I'm old, and my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, Yuan Qinghe said regretfully. Yuan Qinghe said with regret, "If I had put in more effort last year and saw Yanghua's great potential, humph, how could I have left her to you?" Poplar Fruit quickly said modestly, "Dean Yuan, you think too highly of me. I'm not as good as you say." "Old Yuan, don't say that I don't respect the old." Chen Zongdai had a bad temper. He said unhappily, "I think that if Xiao Chen follows you, it would be a waste of talent. What can you teach him? Isn't it just Newmark's 3 axes?" Surprisingly, Yuan Qinghe did not refute. He looked at Chen Zongdai, nodded slightly, and said, Xiao Chen, you're right. I'm a little stubborn. I've been a teacher for so many years, but I still don't know how to teach according to the student's ability. A talent like Xiao Yang should be taught like you. Yuan Qinghe was already an authority in the country, but he could still admit his shortcomings. Chen Zongdai was speechless, and Poplar Fruit's admiration doubled. Yuan Qinghe and Chen Zongdai chatted for a while, talking about their recent schedules. Poplar Fruit couldn't get a word in edgewise. Kiki was impatient. She didn't dare to run away alone, so she hid behind her father and tore at her father's trousers. By the way, a few days ago, I saw an article by Xiao Yang on translation expert. Yuan Qinghe finally remembered Poplar Fruit. He turned his head and said to Poplar Fruit kindly, It's a new theory, right?
Yes.
Poplar Fruit quickly said, It's a relatively new theory in the country. It's mainly based on the method of mutual translation between German and Swedish. The idea is not mature. Yes, he is indeed not mature enough. Yuan Qinghe nodded slightly and said, I have thought about the feasibility of your theory, but the main problem is not that we are the translators, but the original author. If it is a powerful author, he will never let you tamper with his work. Do you understand? Yes, I have considered this problem. Poplar Fruit smiled. Therefore, this theory is rather extreme. Not only does it require a high level of bilingualism, but it also requires the permission of the author. However, I hope that this theory can be used in the translation of ancient Chinese books and contribute to the spread of Chinese culture. It's good for young people to be driven. Yuan Qinghe smiled noncommittally and said, Thinking in a new direction is necessary for learning. That's good. Keep working hard. Even if you fail, it's okay. Take it slow. You still have a long way to go. Yuan Qinghe's words were completely from the perspective of an elder. He wanted to encourage Poplar Fruit. However, his attitude was also very obvious. Yuan Qinghe was not optimistic about Poplar Fruit's theory. It was okay if he failed. In his heart, he felt that Poplar Fruit was bound to fail. Poplar Fruit heard it. He was still a little unconvinced, but he still humbly accepted Yuan Qinghe's opinion. Speaking of which, Xiao Chen, you are the most cunning one here. Yuan Qinghe smiled and said to Chen Zongdai, Xiao Yang has only learned for a short time, and you are already pushing him out in such a hurry. Others think that you are pulling the seedlings to help them grow, but I think that you have a lot of ideas. What do you mean by cunning? Chen Zongdai said angrily and discontentedly.
Ha!
Yuan Qinghe was very satisfied with this effect. He turned to Poplar Fruit and said with a smile, Xiao Yang, don't misunderstand. I was just joking with your teacher. There's no misunderstanding. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Teacher wants me to gain more experience for my own good. Yuan Qinghe nodded and smiled. It's good that you can think like this. Young people should not be afraid of hardships, setbacks, and criticism. Wrestling is also a part of growth. Yuan Qinghe chatted with Chen Zongdai for a while and then separated. He had a lot of acquaintances. It was rare for him to meet, so he had to walk around more. It was impossible for him to stand with the people from Guangdong province for the whole night. After Chen Zongdai watched Yuan Qinghe leave, he suddenly said to Poplar Fruit, You can listen to old Yuan's words. Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment. He looked at Chen Zongdai in confusion. Chen Zongdai smiled proudly and said, Old Yuan's attainments in semiotics are very deep. I, your teacher, am ashamed of my inferiority. However, he's not that good. It's just that vision that limits his development. Poplar Fruit scratched his head. He felt that it wasn't good to gossip about his seniors behind their backs, so he could only listen in silence. Old Yuan didn't think highly of your theory. He thought that I was trying to build momentum for you. Chen Zongdai said, It's okay. You just have to be yourself. Don't feel hopeless because of what he said. Poplar Fruit clenched his fist and said seriously to Chen Zongdai, I know, teacher. I've always been firm. Not only was he firm, but Poplar Fruit had already suppressed his anger during his conversation with Yuan Qinghe. He secretly made up his mind to perform well tomorrow and let those who didn't approve of him know that he wasn't bragging. Don't walk around. It's about time. The banquet is about to start. Chun Zongdai said with a smile. Just as he finished speaking, Poplar Fruit heard a commotion at the door. He turned around and saw a group of people walking in. Professor Luo, Dean Qi. Poplar Fruit called out in his heart. Wasn't that right? In the crowd, Professor Luo Lin and Dean Qi Shan of Beijing Foreign Studies University were mixed in. They were smiling and were constantly greeting people they knew. Poplar Fruit even saw Vice Principal Ma, Dean Qian, and Dean Luo from Chongqing University. However, Vice Principal Ma wasn't standing in the middle of the crowd. Dean Qian and Dean Luo were at the back. In the end, the world still belongs to Beijing and Shanghai. Chun Zongdai suddenly sighed softly and said, seeing Poplar Fruit's confusion, Chun Zongdai pointed at the crowd and introduced them to Poplar Fruit. Most of these people are from the few universities in Beijing and the 2 universities in Shanghai. Old Ma has to accompany them. I don't know the one in the middle. I don't know which leader of Chongqing he is. If they don't come, there's no need for this banquet to continue. Don't you understand? Poplar Fruit nodded thoughtfully. Chun Zongdai's words had already resonated with him a long time ago. Back then, during the Xinda Translation Company's meeting, even though the parent company was in Guangzhou, the representatives from the Beijing and Shanghai branch companies were extremely arrogant and domineering. The students from Guangdong Province's Higashiyama University and Guangdong Foreign Studies University were still competitive in Guangdong Province and even in South China. However, once they were out of South China, no one would recognize them as a brand. This was because the translation industry's teaching resources were still concentrated in Central and North China. Chapter 519. The leader's speech always made people sleepy. At the banquet before the seminar, the leader of Chong City's education department actually came. Although he had been emphasizing that he wouldn't talk nonsense, he still spoke for more than half an hour in the end. Chun Zongdai saw Poplar Fruit's impatient look. He smiled and waved his hand to let Poplar Fruit move freely. Poplar Fruit then pulled Kiki to hide in a corner where no one would notice, as if he had been granted amnesty. Kiki wants to go back. Kiki pouted her little mouth, raised her little head, and muttered to her father. Wait a little longer. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Daddy will be able to take you to eat delicious food soon. Kiki was getting smarter and smarter. She wasn't fooled so easily. But, Papa, we can go eat by ourselves. Papa has money. We can buy a lot of delicious food. How do you know that Daddy has money? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Kiki knows. Kiki nodded seriously and said, Papa has a wallet. But Daddy doesn't have much money in his wallet? Poplar Fruit smiled and teased her. We don't have money to eat out today. Isn't it good to eat for free? Kiki coquettishly pulled on her father's clothes and let out a long trembling sound. She jumped and stomped her feet, pouted her little mouth and said unhappily, Papa can use a card. You even know about cards? Poplar Fruit smiled in surprise. Then tell me, how many cards does Daddy have? Kiki couldn't answer this time. Kiki began to step on her father's feet with her little shoes, then jumped down and kept making a fuss. Kiki wants to go back. Okay, stop making a fuss. This is Daddy's job. If you make a fuss again, Daddy won't play with you anymore. Poplar Fruit gently threatened the little girl. Kiki immediately became a lot more well-behaved, but she was still unconvinced. She pouted so much that a soy sauce bottle could be hung from her lips. Poplar Fruit smiled and pinched Kiki's little mouth. You're not allowed to pout. You have to think about Zhu Beiji. He became so ugly because he always pouted when he was young. Does Kiki want to be pretty or ugly? At the mention of beauty, Kiki immediately pursed her lips. She coquettishly squeezed into her father's embrace and said softly, Kiki doesn't want it. Kiki is very beautiful. Taking some time, Poplar Fruit called Zhu Jingjing to check on the Xiong siblings. There was no need to worry about Xiong Xiaolin. She was still reading in her room. Xiong Xiaofeng, on the other hand, was mesmerized by the television. He sat there and watched without raising his head. Turning around, Poplar Fruit saw that the leader on the stage had finished speaking. However, another leader of the Translation Association continued to nag. After listening for 2 minutes, Poplar Fruit began to stare blankly again. Forget it. Poplar Fruit saw that no one was paying attention to him. He carried his daughter out of the side door and stayed in the corridor. The corridor was connected to the hotel's small garden. At this time, the small garden was dimly lit and quiet. There was no one there. It was perfect for Poplar Fruit to make a call. Poplar Fruit had been thinking about calling Fong Beibei for a long time. The phone rang a few times, and Fong Beibei picked it up. It was so convenient in the dormitory. It was not like when she was at home, where she had to hide from her mother. Are you alone in the dormitories? Poplar Fruit asked with concern. Yes. Fong Beibei answered with a sigh and a moan. Are you reading? Yes. Fong Beibei said gloomily. I do exercises every day. Even when I close my eyes, I can see the formulas. Why don't you give up on the competition? Poplar Fruit laughed. Come to Qing City. Let's travel together. I don't want to. Fong Beibei's attitude changed 180 degrees. She said angrily, How can you say that? You want me to give up before I even start? Do you know how difficult it is to participate in the competition? Many seniors don't even have a chance to participate in the competition in their 3rd and 4th year. Okay, if it wasn't for the fact that I have to attend the seminar, I would have stayed in Yangqing to study with you. Yanghua smiled. I feel a little embarrassed playing outside by myself. Pfft, uncle, what's there to be embarrassed about? Fong Beibei shouted. Don't tell me you want to bring everyone with you when you go on a trip? You're different from others. Poplar Fruit said something very mushy. Fong Beibei took 2 deep breaths and said, Are you trying to make me happy again? How is this making you happy? It's from the bottom of my heart. Poplar Fruit laughed. Uncle, what are you doing now? Fong Beibei changed the topic. Preparing for tomorrow's meeting? There's nothing to prepare for tomorrow. Everything I want to say is already in my head, Poplar Fruit said proudly. There's a cocktail party today. I came with the professor. Cocktail party? Then, aren't you going to make a profit? There are so many beauties. Fong Beibei said in a strange tone. There aren't any beauties. Poplar Fruit cried out. They're all professors, and they're not young anymore. Even if they were beauties, they wouldn't be able to tell. You're not happy without beauties, are you? Fong Beibei said in a light tone with a smile. Uncle, don't always think about looking at beauties. There's still a lot of beautiful things in this world.
AI.
Why can't I say anything right? You're the one who brought up the topic of beauties. Poplar Fruit said helplessly. He, I won't tease you anymore. After arguing with Poplar Fruit for a while, Fong Beibei came out from the dizzy state of solving the problem. You have a meeting tomorrow. What about Big Sister Yi? Do you have time to arrange it? Fong Beibei asked. Don't you know who I am? Poplar Fruit proudly said, I've already arranged it. Moreover, Aunt Yi had an operation this afternoon. The effect was very good. She'll stay for a few days. Once the wound is healed, she can be discharged.
So fast.
Fong Beibei frowned and asked, Isn't it too rushed? You've been in the car all night. Wouldn't it be dangerous to have an operation? It shouldn't be a problem, right? Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, Big Sister Yi has actually been resting. Moreover, the operation was arranged by the hospital. They'll check it. Chatting with Fong Beibei, Poplar Fruit felt very relaxed. The two of them were as comfortable as chatting. He didn't say that he had to be careful because of the person he liked. He was afraid that he would say something that would cause the other party to misunderstand. Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei's relationship was very subtle. The two of them weren't boyfriend and girlfriend yet, but long before Poplar Fruit's confession, the two of them chatted very casually. They didn't seem like friends who had just been friends for more than half a year. Instead, they seemed like childhood sweethearts who grew up together. Especially at that time in the small room in the teacher's apartment, that warmth seemed to be love. Perhaps it had already surpassed love. Sometimes when Poplar Fruit calmed down and thought about his progress with Fong Beibei, he would feel this way. Chapter 520. When they went back, the banquet had already begun, and the leaders who had finished their speeches were nowhere to be found. But this was not important. Poplar Fruit breathed a sigh of relief, took a plate, and began to find food for him and Kiki. What does Kiki want to eat? Poplar Fruit looked left and right, and found that it was better to ask Kiki. Papa, cake. Kiki had already seen the exquisite small cakes on the buffet table. Usually, Poplar Fruit rarely bought cakes for her, because children could not eat too many sweets, but Kiki had a special fondness for cakes. Okay. Poplar Fruit was happy today, so he did not refuse. He picked up 2 small cakes on the plate. There's more. Kiki reluctantly looked at the big tray with the small cakes and said, "You can only eat 2 at most," Poplar Fruit said. "We have to leave some for others." After picking up some more food, Poplar Fruit carried the plate to the table near the corner. Kiki happily followed behind, and her small steps were very neat, for fear that she could not keep up with her father. "I don't want wine. Do you have juice? Give me a glass of juice." Poplar Fruit smiled and declined the waiter with the tray, but the service of the hotel was very good, and soon someone brought a glass of fresh orange juice to Poplar Fruit. In the banquet, other people drank red wine, but Poplar Fruit drank juice. He could be regarded as a weirdo. However, Poplar Fruit was not a person who liked to follow the rules. He had already quit drinking. Even if it was a social event, Poplar Fruit would not drink. Poplar Fruit ruthlessly cut the good-looking small cakes with a silver fork and then gave small pieces to Kiki to eat. From time to time, he would coax Kiki to drink some juice, which would help with digestion. The chair on his left was pulled out. Poplar Fruit turned his head and saw a familiar person sitting down beside him. Other than Professor Roland, who else could it be? Professor Luo's. Poplar Fruit was shocked. He quickly stood up and greeted him. Sit. Luo Lin smiled and waved his hand. "I saw your back from afar. Now that I've come to take a look, it's really you." Poplar Fruit scratched his head with a smile and said, "Actually, I also saw you at the beginning, but you were talking to someone, so I couldn't find a chance to say hello to you." "It's all right. I know it's not convenient for you either." Luo Lin smiled. "You're always inseparable from your daughter. You even brought her along to Great City. That can't be helped." Poplar Fruit smiled. "You should hurry up and find a wife." Luo Lin shook his head and said, "It's not just about children. You should also consider marriage." Poplar Fruit smiled embarrassedly. "I think Xiaozheng is good." Luo Lin suddenly pulled Jing Yuji out of the blue. "You two are a perfect match. I think you two will have a chance in the capital." "We're just friends," Poplar Fruit explained awkwardly. "You'll have feelings after being friends for a long time," Luo Lin said earnestly. "Tell me, how is Xiaozheng not good enough for you? She's pretty and has a successful career. She's the deputy editor of the publishing house and will be helpful to your career. Most importantly, she's interested in you and doesn't mind that you have a child." Yes, how is Zheng Yujie not good enough for Poplar Fruit? Poplar Fruit couldn't answer Luo Lin's question. He mumbled for a long time but couldn't find a reason to refute. "In my opinion, you should come to Beijing to study. How can the two of you live so far apart? In Beijing, you'll be able to meet and interact with each other." Luo Lin laughed. Poplar Fruit nearly fainted from Luo Lin's words. However, he was still relatively firm when it came to relationships. When Luo Lin revealed his foxtail, Poplar Fruit blinked his eyes and immediately discovered it. "Professor Luo." Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he continued, "You're making fun of me again." "Am I?" Luo Lin rolled his eyes and pretended to be innocent as he continued, "Hey, why is it so hard to be a matchmaker in this world? My good intentions are misunderstood." "Did I misunderstand?" Poplar Fruit retorted, "Aren't you trying to trick me into studying in Beijing?" "How can you call it a trick?" After being exposed, Luo Lin wasn't embarrassed as he laughed. "How is studying in Beijing not better than studying in Yangqing? Furthermore, you'll be able to see little Zheng often. I'm doing this for your own good." Shaking his head, Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he replied, "Professor Luo, you don't have to worry about me and Yujia. It's not what you think it is." Chen Zongdai was currently chatting with a professor from Higashiyama University. Inadvertently, he glanced at Poplar Fruit and saw Luo Lin sneaking over to Poplar Fruit's side. Chen Zongdai inwardly cursed, that old fox. After apologizing to his friend, Chen Zongdai immediately walked over to Poplar Fruit. Right now, he was like a dragon sitting on a mountain of gold, constantly on guard against others. When Luo Lin saw him walking over, he immediately shut his mouth.
Good job, old Luo.
Looks like you haven't forgotten your talent in poaching after all these years. Chen Zongdai said half-jokingly. How can this be considered poaching? Luo Lin generously retorted. I was the one who discovered Little Yang in the first place, okay? That won't do. Poplar Fruit became my disciple, so he's one of my people. Chen Zongdai pushed Poplar Fruit and said, sit over there, sit over there. He forcefully squeezed between Luo Lin and Poplar Fruit and sat down on Poplar Fruit's seat. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to pick up Kiki and sit down on the other side. Kiki looked at the bearded grandfather and then at the beardless grandfather. She felt strange in her heart. The two grandpas are the same age. So how come one has a beard and the other doesn't? Could it be that some other kid pulled out the beard of the other grandpa? Okay. No one is poaching your student. Luo Lin lied without blinking. I'm discussing a rigorous academic problem with Little Yang. Really? Chen Zongdai asked with a face of disbelief. Really? Luo Lin nodded with a smile and said, after reading Little Yang's thesis, I felt that we could explore and collaborate on the theory of translation, so I wanted to talk to him about it. Chen Zongdai was still a little skeptical. He cautiously said, if you want to collaborate, you can look for me. If you want to discuss theories with Poplar Fruit, you don't have to rush. For tomorrow's seminar, Poplar Fruit has a keynote presentation at 2 p.m. After 2 days, there will be plenty of time to discuss it. Luo Lin shrugged and smiled indifferently. Okay, I'm here this time to listen to Little Yang's brilliant ideas. Old Chen, Little Yang, when we discuss collaboration, don't forget that Beijing International Studies University is very sincere. After chatting for a while, he got up and left, leaving behind a confused Poplar Fruit and Chen Zongdai. Are we really going to collaborate? Poplar Fruit asked the teacher. What are we collaborating on? You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask? Chen Zongdai said with a grin. Chapter 5:21. If the cocktail party was just a warm-up, then the seminar was the real deal. The next night, shortly after returning to the hostel, Chen Zongdai received the complete schedule of the meeting. He only knew about the schedule of his school. After Chen Zongdai saw the schedule of the conference, he cursed in his room and said, are the organizers stupid? How could they do this? Kiki was already asleep, so Poplar Fruit came to his teacher's room to discuss with him. Poplar Fruit took the schedule from his teacher and looked at it. He didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Let me see. Huang Shuiyu took the paper and looked at it. His face sank as he said, what are they thinking? Why did they arrange for Professor Fei from Sorcery Capital to be at the same time as Xiao Yang? In the past few years, the seminar was no longer a group of people listening to the leader speak. Instead, they learned from other countries and used a theme report and free discussion mode. Naturally, a dozen theme reports from scholars were arranged for the first 2 days. Then, 2 days were set aside for the scholars to freely group together and discuss the topics they were interested in. At first, Chen Zongdai was a little satisfied when he heard that Poplar Fruit's theme report was scheduled for 2:00 in the afternoon on the first day. 2:00 in the afternoon was not a good time. It was still afternoon nap time. People were sleepy and wouldn't even choose to come at this time. However, for a young person like Poplar Fruit, it was a good opportunity. Because big names like Chen Zongdai were usually scheduled for the second day or the first day's prime time. The organizers usually didn't arrange any important theme reports at 2:00 in the afternoon on the first day. With the popularity of Poplar Fruit's report, Chen Zongdai believed that it would attract a lot of people. Chen Zongdai didn't tell Poplar Fruit this, mainly because he didn't want to add too much pressure to Poplar Fruit and affect his performance. However, Chen Zhongdai didn't expect that the organizers would arrange for Professor Fei from the Shanghai Foreign Languages University to compete with Poplar Fruit at the same time as Poplar Fruit. Professor Fei focused on academic research and didn't have any important official titles in the university. However, he was a symbol of the Shanghai Foreign Languages University. In the 1990s, his Introduction to Linguistics caused a sensation in the country. Even today, many universities listed this book as a compulsory theory course for English majors. In the past 2 years, Professor Fei didn't publish any groundbreaking papers, but no one questioned his academic status. Even scholars like Chen Zhongdai didn't dare to be careless when they met with Professor Fei. "Shady, it must be shady," Chen Zhongdai said. "The Northerners are up to no good." The Northerners that Chen Zhongdai was talking about were obviously not the universities in the southern cities. He was talking about the universities in Shanghai and Beijing. The universities in South China didn't have much say in the Translation Association. They were the only ones who could influence the organizers. Seeing the arrangement, the 2 reports from Higashiyama University were more or less excluded.
Chen Zhongdai was fine.
As the leader of the functional language school, he was strong and wasn't afraid of anyone. However, although Poplar Fruit was his disciple, he was still a newcomer. How many listeners would he have if he encountered someone like Professor Fei? After asking for the reason, Poplar Fruit was stunned for a while. He smiled and said, "Teacher, don't worry about me. As long as there is one more listener, I will work hard on this report. I won't waste this precious opportunity." It's good that you can think this way. Don't take the pressure to heart. Maybe you can do better. Chen Zhongdai appreciated Poplar Fruit's attitude, but he still felt a little uncomfortable. It's just that those people are too much. Their intention to suppress people is too obvious. 10 years ago, when I was young and energetic, I would have rolled up my sleeves and argued with them. "Teacher, it's okay." Poplar Fruit smiled and comforted Chen Zhongdai. "They look down on us, so we have to perform better. We have to satisfy the audience and make those who didn't come regret it." Poplar Fruit would be lying to himself if he said that he didn't care at all. He had his own pride. He didn't think that he was worse than anyone else in the world. Even if he couldn't do it now, he would be able to do it in the future. He could accept other people's unfair arrangements, but he would never accept other people's contempt for him. Just like when he heard Dean Yuanqing his words at the cocktail party, Poplar Fruit felt that other universities didn't value him. "Do you all think that I'm someone you can easily bully? Do you all think that Professor Fei can easily beat me?" Poplar Fruit was not convinced. While he comforted his teacher, he secretly made up his mind to do better. He had to show them that he wasn't worse than anyone else. He would make those who didn't come regret it. These words weren't just for show. Under the dark curtain, there was an undercurrent. Sometimes, no one knew what kind of accidents and variables would appear in a carefully planned arrangement. After receiving the detailed schedule of the conference, many people who were interested in Poplar Fruit's name began to hesitate. On one side, it was the young Poplar Fruit that everyone wanted to talk about. On the other side, it was the old professor that no one knew if he would be able to taste something new. The choice was personal. Even the people behind the scenes couldn't guarantee that reality would follow the path they had planned. Moreover, Poplar Fruit was only one of the aspects that they didn't pay much attention to. Naturally, they wouldn't continue to put in the effort to arrange it. At the headquarters of Beijing International Studies University, Luo Lin, Qiushan, and a few other professors were discussing which schools to listen to. They were mainly talking about the big names that would appear on the second day. Interesting. Let Xiaoyang and Old Phil speak at the same time. Luo Lin suddenly laughed softly. "Xiaoyang? You're talking about Poplar Fruit?" Qiushan was quite interested in this name. He suspiciously glanced at the conference schedule and didn't see it on the second day's schedule. He only found Poplar Fruit's name on the first day's schedule. Qiushan also smiled meaningfully. With his position, it was naturally impossible for him to not see the meaning behind this arrangement. "I don't care who you listen to. I'm going to listen to Xiao Yang's keynote report." Luo Lin shrugged and laughed. "Old Luo thinks so highly of this young man?" A similarly aged professor opened his mouth and said, "I'm quite interested." I'll go listen too. I'll go too. Xiao Shan smiled. Giving face to Higashiyama University and Shinzongdai is a good choice. If you all go, we'll also join in the fun. The remaining two professors also laughed. The things that old Phil talks about can be guessed with your eyes closed. Why don't we see what this young man has to say? Chapter 5:22. As Chunzongdai said, the first day of the report was boring. Poplar Fruit asked Xiong Xiaolin to take care of Kiki. He went to listen to 4 reports in the morning and found that 2 of them were boring. Poplar Fruit listened to half of the 4 reports and left secretly to listen to other reports. Only one of the professors was from a famous university, but all 4 of them were average. Poplar Fruit had read their theses in the past 2 years. He found that the content of their reports was no different from their theses. Basically, they followed the theories and examples of their theses. There was even one person who simply read the thesis out loud, which made people feel sleepy just by listening to it. However, it was not without results. After listening to other people's failures, Poplar Fruit started to pay attention. During lunch break, Poplar Fruit quickly sorted out his draft and changed all the examples in his thesis. Only Poplar Fruit could make such a big change in such a short time. He had no choice. His brain was a huge database. As long as he wanted, he could find many similar examples from a large number of translation cases and books that he had read before, and there were no duplicates. In the morning, there were 4 reports at the same time. At 2 p.m., there were only 2 reports from Poplar Fruit and Professor Fei. The organizer arranged for Poplar Fruit to be in the small conference room on the 2nd floor of the Student Activity Center. Professor Fei was arranged to be in the middle conference room on the 3rd floor. Poplar Fruit went to the middle conference room in the morning to listen to the reports. The scale and equipment were much better than the one on the 2nd floor. However, Poplar Fruit did not mind. He went to the 2nd floor early to prepare. He adjusted the sound system with the student volunteers. Yang Guo was only a few years older than the students at Chongqing University. His skin and appearance looked especially young. If not for the black suit he was wearing, others would have mistaken him for a student volunteer. At this time, no audience had arrived yet. Yang Guo and the student volunteers from University of Great Metropolis chatted as they busied themselves. Poplar Fruit had done similar work in university. He was very familiar with the sound system. Coupled with his handsome appearance and gentle tone, he quickly got along well with the student volunteers. I thought those teachers were very rigid. I didn't expect Senior Yang to be so approachable, a boy whispered to the girl next to him. Yeah, the one in the morning was hard to please. If only everyone was as handsome and approachable as Senior Yang. The girl next to him looked at Poplar Fruit with sparkling eyes. Poplar Fruit was not the kind of handsome man who looked stunning at first glance. However, he was definitely comfortable to look at. The more you looked at him, the more you liked him. His tall and thin figure was even more charming in his black slim-fit suit. Although Poplar Fruit looked about the same age as them, the faint aura he exuded was enough to pull apart the gap between him and the other young boys. After the adjustment, Poplar Fruit stood on the side of the podium near the door and started to wait and welcome the audience. Compared to those cold professors, Poplar Fruit's humble attitude made many people feel comfortable. Originally, many people just walked to the door to take a look and then left. However, Poplar Fruit's greetings made more than half of the people feel embarrassed to leave. Therefore, people started to enter Poplar Fruit's small conference hall one after another. However, there were still not many people. Poplar Fruit's qualifications were there. Most of the attendees naturally chose Professor Fei between Poplar Fruit and Professor Fei. According to the dean of the faculty, Huang Xueyu, who had secretly gone to inquire about the news, almost half of the people in the conference hall upstairs were already seated. The conference hall could hold 200 people. Almost half of it was 100 people. The small conference hall was similar to a classroom and could hold 100 people. However, Poplar Fruit's conference hall only had a dozen people. The difference was too obvious. Don't mind it too much. Just be yourself. Old Huang, don't go anymore. Chun Zongdai came to oversee Poplar Fruit and said in a low voice to Poplar Fruit. Another dozen people came one after another, but it was still not many. Looking at the size of the audience in this small conference hall, it was not even comparable to a small class in school. Poplar Fruit's face was as calm as water, but he was not convinced. Poplar Fruit, I'm here to support you. Suddenly, Luo Lin's hearty laughter came from the door. Professor Luo. Poplar Fruit hurriedly collected his thoughts and turned to look. Dean Shi, why are you all here? Haha, are we not welcome? Luo Lin joked. No. We are honored by your presence. Poplar Fruit is more than happy to come. Please come in. Poplar Fruit smiled and welcomed them. These teachers are? Poplar Fruit asked curiously. These are the teachers of our school. Let me introduce you. Luo Lin smiled and said, this is the director of the Foreign Language Teaching Center, Professor Guiqi. This is our school's Professor Xiatao. And this is Professor Yu Yongxiang from the School of Advanced Study. Poplar Fruit respectfully shook hands with them one by one. Because of Luo Lin's relationship, the three professors of Beijing Foreign Studies University were all amiable to Poplar Fruit. Of course, even without Luo Lin, with Chen Zongdai standing behind Poplar Fruit, they would not make things too difficult for Poplar Fruit. Chen Zongdai was more familiar with the people of Beijing Foreign Studies University. After Poplar Fruit greeted them, he invited them to take a seat and chatted with them. Chen Zongdai was secretly surprised. He did not think that his quiet disciple would have such power. He was able to gather the 5 representatives of Beijing Foreign Studies University at his report. The only ones that could compete with Beijing Foreign Studies University were Shanghai Foreign Studies University and a few top comprehensive universities like Beijing University and Shuimu University. The arrival of Luo Lin and the others gave Poplar Fruit a lot of bargaining chips. Some of the participants who looked over were shocked when they saw the group of people from Beijing Foreign Studies University. They hesitated for a while before walking in. They were mainly curious. They wanted to know how powerful Poplar Fruit was to be able to attract the attention of the 5 gods. Just like this, the audience for Poplar Fruit's report gradually increased. Even though it was about to start, the small conference hall was still not full. However, more than half of the seats were filled. This was much more than the previous 20 people. Poplar Fruit looked at the time on his phone and took a deep breath. He tidied up his clothes and walked on stage with a smile on his face. Poplar Fruit looked at the audience that was older and more experienced than him. His eyes were firm. He was ready to begin. Looking for votes. Looking for recommendations. Greater than or equal to. Chapter 5:23. Poplar Fruit walked up to the podium. As the teacher, Chen Zongdai was still a bit reserved, but Luo Lin was not so reserved. He took the lead and clapped. Under his lead, everyone started to clap. The atmosphere slowly became lively. Poplar Fruit nodded at him gratefully. However, Poplar Fruit was more eager to receive heartfelt applause from the audience than this kind of encouragement. Thank you. Thank you. Poplar Fruit waited for the applause to stop before he smiled and thanked Luo Lin. His opening speech was very short. It was only a few sentences. He introduced himself, the school, and the name of his topic. That was it. Luo Lin secretly cursed, "You're still too young. That's not how you handle a speech. You should interact with the audience or use some foreshadowing to arouse the audience's enthusiasm." However, did Poplar Fruit really not understand? In order to prepare for this speech, Poplar Fruit had read a lot of speech scripts and made ample preparations. He naturally understood the importance of the opening speech, but he had to make concessions for his content. According to the rules of the conference, a keynote speech only had an hour and a half. If he could not finish speaking, he would have to give up his seat to the next speaker. Unless you were a famous master like Luo Lin, Qiu Shan, Chen Zongdai, or Yuan Qinghe, then you would have the confidence to occupy the podium. Unfortunately, Poplar Fruit was not any of them. Poplar Fruit prepared a lot of content for a new theory. Not only did he prepare the content in his thesis, but he also prepared a lot of content that did not appear in his thesis due to the length. An hour and a half, Poplar Fruit felt like he was running out of time. Therefore, instead of starting the speech with nonsense, it was better to change the strategy. Let's win with content. Let's win with theory. Currently, the guiding principle of translation theory is nothing more than changing the original language and expressing it the same way. Whatever the original says, the translation says. Whatever the original says, the translation says. Poplar Fruit paused and smiled. This is unanimously recognized by translators. Whether it is the faithfulness in Mr. Yen Fu's standard of faithfulness, expressiveness, and elegance, Mr. Lu Sun's standard of faithfulness, elegance, and elegance, or Mr. Fu Lei's standard of faithfulness, all require the translator to be faithful to the original content. I believe that all the teachers present here have encountered the same difficulties in their early days as translators. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "We have too many masters to serve. On the one hand, there are the original works, and on the other hand, there are the readers of our translations. Especially the readers. There are 1,000 Hamlets among 1,000 readers. It's impossible for us not to make mistakes and not be criticized." As soon as he said this, a few kind laughs came from below the stage. As translators, we have to thoroughly understand the original work. Not only do we have to understand the meaning of the words, but we also have to understand the meaning between the words and even the tone beyond the words. We also have to let our readers understand the original work through the translation. The content can't be added or deleted, and the tone can't be out of tune. The meaning of the original work can only be heard from the strings, and the hidden meaning can only be attached to the words. It's not easy to thoroughly understand the original work, and it's even more difficult to express it according to the original work. What's more, if we translate it according to the original work, we may not be able to win the favor of the target readers. Yanghua said faintly, "This is also the reason why so many excellent cultural ancient books in our country's history were not accepted by the people of other countries after they were translated. Therefore, when I'm translating, I'm also thinking about how to find a breakthrough. Although it's not easy, maybe the theory of adaptation proposed in my paper can give you a little inspiration." Before I state my theory, I want to make 2 points clear. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "First, this theory was not created by me, but was inspired by the theories of Dari and Rue translation and ancient Sanskrit translation abroad. Second, this theory is not applicable to everyone, or it can be said that the scope of application is very narrow. It has high requirements for the translators who use this theory. They need to have a superb grasp of multiple languages, and they also need to have a strong ability to reproduce. If you are judging my theory from the point of view of the general public, then there's no need for you to continue listening." When Poplar Fruit finished the sentence, his attitude was very humble, and his tone was very calm. However, between the lines, he reflected his strong confidence in himself. There were so many seniors in the audience, and Poplar Fruit's words were actually a little offensive. However, most of them just frowned and didn't say anything. They listened very carefully, wanting to see the source of Poplar Fruit's confidence. There's a reason why the requirements are so high. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Take the Dari and Rue bilingual translation, for example. The two languages are originally of the same origin. Although there have been changes in history, the differences are not big. Therefore, translators of the two languages can easily reach the level of proficiency at the same time. This also makes it possible for them to change their translation. The grammar of Chinese and Western languages is very different, including the style of writing. Similar to the angle and sweetness, we can use the word translation to explain. When we translators do translation, if the translation is not good enough, the sentence will be like a somersault that did not succeed and fell to the ground, or 2 feet in the air, or a twisted foot that can't stand steadily. Therefore, if we want to reach the level of using the theory of translation, we need to have a very high level of language proficiency and the ability to reproduce. A figurative metaphor was always easier to accept than a straightforward explanation. Poplar Fruit's metaphor of translation made the atmosphere in the conference hall much better. Poplar Fruit continued his explanation closely. Everyone was mainly listening. In the whole audience, Only Chinzongdai had the leisure to pay attention to some of the details of his disciple's speech. Without mentioning anything else, Chinzongdai was already sweating when he saw Poplar Fruit's completely off-script speech. Previously, Chinzongdai had asked Poplar Fruit to type out the script, but Poplar Fruit said that he remembered it all and did not need to bring the script to the stage. Chinzongdai, who had decided to let Poplar Fruit soar from the beginning, did not say anything else. But now it seemed that this kid really went off script. And after speaking for so long, he actually did not make any mistakes. Chinzongdai actually had a trace of admiration for his disciple. He had been a teacher for so many years and had taught no less than 1,000 classes and speeches, but he could not do it completely off script. At least, he had to bring an outline, but Poplar Fruit did it. Speaking off script was more charming than reading from a script. The occasional eye contact also slightly made up for Poplar Fruit's inappropriate flow during the speech. People with good memory are really enviable. Chapter 5:24. Generally speaking, an off-script speaker would use PowerPoint to straighten out their thoughts, but Poplar Fruit didn't. He had already asked the student volunteers to turn off the projector, and all the information he was going to talk about was organized in his mind. This could highlight the speaker's strength and make people believe in him, but it also brought about a small inconvenience. It was easy for the audience to forget the vast amount of information that Poplar Fruit talked about. Therefore, after Poplar Fruit went deeper into the lecture, the audience's attention was gradually focused. The entire conference room was silent, and only Poplar Fruit's voice could be heard. If Chinzongdai was Poplar Fruit's talent scout, then Luo Lin was now Poplar Fruit's fan. He sat in the first row. Poplar Fruit didn't notice at first, but when he inadvertently glanced at him, Poplar Fruit paused. Luo Lin actually took out a pen and paper, and like a student in class, he listened attentively while diligently taking notes. Among the audience for Poplar Fruit's keynote presentation, any one of them was older than Poplar Fruit. In terms of seniority, they could definitely be Poplar Fruit's teacher. Although they were also listening with great interest, they were still reserved and wouldn't lower themselves to take notes. Therefore, when Poplar Fruit saw Professor Luo Lin's actions, he was shocked. The professors from Beijing International Studies University who came with Luo Lin were also speechless. They wiped the cold sweat from their foreheads and thought to themselves, Old Luo, you're embarrassing us outside of Beijing." Poplar Fruit was talking excitedly when someone suddenly raised his hand. Poplar Fruit paused. He didn't plan on answering questions during his presentation, but after hesitating, he still smiled and asked, "Hello, how should I address this teacher?" He couldn't ignore him, otherwise he would leave the impression that he was arrogant. "Hello, I'm Professor Do from Xi and International Studies University." Poplar Fruit's politeness made Professor Do very happy. He stood up and smiled. Just as he was about to take a deep breath and ask his question, Poplar Fruit spoke again. He first bowed and then said, "Professor Do, how are you? Do you have any questions for me? But can we put it aside for now and leave it for later?" Poplar Fruit's words stunned Professor Do. He had already stood up, but Poplar Fruit wanted him to sit back down. "Professor Do, I'm really sorry. It's like this." Poplar Fruit explained with a smile, "The report only lasts for 1.5 hours. In order to ensure that I can finish today's content, I have to postpone the Q&A session. I know that there are many areas where we can further communicate with each other. It doesn't matter. Even if the 1.5 hours is up, we can still continue to discuss. I hope that you can understand and forgive me." Originally, Professor Do felt a little embarrassed, but Poplar Fruit's timely apology and explanation gave him a way out. Professor Do looked at the dissatisfied eyes of the people around him, so he had no choice but to bow and sit down. If Poplar Fruit continued, he wouldn't even have time to breathe. Half an hour had already passed, and he had only just started with the translation theory. There were still 12 translation methods that he had to give examples one by one. Half an hour was tight for Poplar Fruit, so it passed in the blink of an eye. However, for the audience who went to listen to Professor Fei's report from Shanghai, half an hour felt like a year. Professor Fei was old, and his memory had deteriorated. Not only that, but his creativity and charisma were also not as good as before. In recent years, he had been in a semi-retired state. Other than teaching students as a teacher, he was eating his savings from his early years. Originally, Professor Fei came to this seminar to travel and relax. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to this topic report at all. Not only was there no novelty in what he talked about, but he also treated the professors in the audience as his own students. He was holding a book of his previous work and reading it from it. Who would be able to listen to such a speech where he had to gasp for breath while speaking? If it weren't for everyone giving face to Professor Fei, some people would have left as soon as the lecture started. Even so, other than a few people in the front row who pretended to support him, the people in the back row were all lying down. They just happened to not have enough nap, so they wanted to take a nap. Professor Fei was old, and his body couldn't function anymore. After speaking for half an hour, he drank a large glass of water and trembled as he went to the bathroom. He called it a halftime break. This gave everyone a chance to escape. 2 professors from Nanhu University sneaked out from the back door. As they went down the stairs, they sighed and said, "If we knew that Professor Fei was so weak, we wouldn't have come." Yeah. Their colleague shook his head and said, Let's go back and rest. You have a report to do at 4:30. It's a waste of time. I saw so many people sleeping behind us. They must be regretting it. Sleeping in the guest house is more comfortable than sleeping on the table. He gloated and said, Luckily we were smart and left quickly. Otherwise, when Professor Fei came back, we wouldn't be able to leave. Hey, wait, there's a report on the 2nd floor. Their colleagues saw Poplar Fruit's conference room when they passed by the 2nd floor. A few student volunteers were looking in through the window. The professor, who wanted to go back to rest and prepare for his report, shook his head and said, Yeah, I think it's a report by a professor named Poplar Fruit from Higashiyama University. But he's not famous, so forget it. Isn't there only one Dai in Higashiyama University? Who's Poplar Fruit? Their colleague asked in confusion. How about we take a look at the door? Well, we're already here anyway, the professor said noncommittally. Therefore, the 2 professors from Shi and International Studies University tiptoed into the small conference room. With just one look, they couldn't move.
Fuck.
Is that a student on the stage?
He's so young.
Their colleague almost exclaimed. He's Poplar Fruit? The professor looked at Poplar Fruit in surprise and then looked at the audience. Isn't that Professor Chioshan from Beijing International Studies University? Why is he here too? It seems like everyone from Beijing International Studies University is here. Their colleague looked around carefully and saw someone he knew. That's Professor Guiqi. I saw him at the last CET 4 and CET 6 exam summary. What's so good about this Poplar Fruit? Why are there so many powerful people sitting at his report? The professor said with jealousy. How about we go in and listen? Their colleague was eager. If Professor Guiqi is here, it must be more interesting than Professor Fei's report. Let's listen. It's a waste of time to go back to the guest house anyway, the professor said. Therefore, the 2 asked the student volunteers to open the back door. They sneaked in and found a seat in the back row. Chapter 5:25. The 2 professors from Nanhu University snuck in. Perhaps they only wanted to see what the young Poplar Fruit was capable of, but once they sat down, they could not leave. Poplar Fruit was able to make so many powerful people listen attentively. Naturally, Poplar Fruit's speech was not like Professor Fei's. Not only was Poplar Fruit's speech not fake, but there was also a large amount of solid information. Every minute and every second, Poplar Fruit could throw out a question or example that was worth thinking about. There was no room for distraction. Those who were slightly less capable, such as Professor Do from Shib and International Studies University, gradually could not keep up with the speed of Poplar Fruit's speech. He could not stop sweating on his forehead, but he did not dare to raise his hand to wipe it off. This was because if he was distracted, Poplar Fruit might jump to the next section. After the two professors from Nanhu University came in, the back door was repeatedly opened. Many professors who had just left from the third floor, or had just woken up, walked in suspiciously. Then, they were attracted by the content of Poplar Fruit's speech. It was as if their butts had grown roots, and they could not move away. Deleting words that can be simplified is what Liu Zhiji of the Tang dynasty called shirtong and Wai Pian meant by little annoyance. By eliminating the miscellaneous words, a large number of useless words can be eliminated, and the translation can be cleansed to be clear and smooth. When Poplar Fruit talked about the abbreviated translation, he even quoted from the classics. Of course, this is a very detailed and difficult process. On the one hand, you have to try to refine a sentence to be concise and appropriate, and on the other hand, you have to be careful not to delete words that cannot be omitted. Poplar Fruit gave many examples of Chinese to English and English-Chinese translations. These examples were accumulated when he was doing translation tasks or when he was reading some excellent translations. Compared to the examples in textbooks, Poplar Fruit resonated more with the great translators present. They nodded in agreement and couldn't help but clap in a low voice. These small actions could be seen at any time in the small conference hall. Poplar Fruit was very happy to receive the recognition of so many seniors, but he couldn't thank them one by one. He could only silently remember them in his heart and continue with his speech. More and more people came in from behind, and the back seats were almost full. Some professors didn't even care about their old faces and shamelessly called the student volunteers in the back seats up and asked them to give up their seats. The small conference room wasn't big. If someone spoke from the back, they could hear it clearly from the front. Therefore, Poplar Fruit's speech was more or less affected. It was inconvenient for Qin Zongdai to get up, but Huang Shuyu saw that there was a bit of chaos at the back, so he took the initiative to stand up and help Poplar Fruit maintain order. Seeing that the atmosphere was so lively, compared to the small conference hall, some professors secretly took out their phones and sent text messages to their friends, asking them to come and take a look. Whose student is this child? Higashiyama University? Is he Qin Zongdai's student? There were also a lot of professors who had just come down from the third floor and were separated from their friends. After a while, they were impressed by Poplar Fruit's speech and quickly sent text messages to their friends to come back. Hurry up, don't call me if you regret not coming. In fact, the happiest people were the 60-plus professors who were sitting in the conference hall from the beginning. They had been listening from the beginning. Poplar Fruit had a lot of valuable summaries that were placed in the first 30 minutes. In the last hour, he mainly used examples and sub-arguments to explain his previous theoretical points. Compared to the people who came in later, they had a clearer understanding of Poplar Fruit's theoretical framework, so they felt more comfortable listening to the latter part of the speech. If the professors who came in later hadn't read Yanggua's thesis, or if they didn't read it carefully, they didn't understand what she was talking about. Yanggua explained the subpoints very well, and they were very attractive. However, they couldn't connect all the information together. As they listened, they couldn't help but secretly ask the people next to them, without caring about their own faces. However, the people next to them might not know. Because of this, many people were depressed and regretful. They could only wait patiently for Poplar Fruit to finish speaking and ask him for a copy of the lecture notes to study. 1.5 hours was neither long nor short, but for Poplar Fruit, it passed in the blink of an eye. He timed it very well. When it was almost 1 hour and 25 minutes, Poplar Fruit began his summary statement. When he was giving his summary statement, Poplar Fruit's voice trembled slightly. He was not nervous, but he was too excited. The small conference hall in front of him was full of people. Yes, it was full. As early as half an hour ago, the seats in the small conference hall were already full. However, there was still an endless stream of professors who heard the news. Of course, as professors, they wouldn't just sit on the aisle like the students. They would just stand at the back. There were more and more people. In the end, the small conference hall was full of people. In order to make sure everyone could hear, Poplar Fruit even raised his voice. It was not an exaggeration to say that this situation was explosive. Poplar Fruit never imagined this result. He did not even dare to imagine it. From the beginning, there were not enough people. To the end, it was full. In terms of the number of people, Poplar Fruit's audience doubled in just 1 hour. Compared to the sparse audience in the conference hall on the 3rd floor, this situation was extremely ironic in the eyes of the organizers. Chen Zhongdai was very satisfied with his apprentice's performance. He could not help but look at the crowd behind him. He was very proud of himself as he said, "See, I told you guys not to come in the beginning. Now you have to stand." No matter how excited Poplar Fruit was, or how proud Chen Zhongdai was, the audience in the small conference hall was focused on memorizing every word that Poplar Fruit said. Maybe it was a pity that they did not hear the beginning, but every word that Poplar Fruit said was based on his experience. His original analysis could make people think deeply. Even though they were professors, they couldn't help but be impressed by Yang's solid theoretical foundation and her ability to innovate new ideas. They did not hear the beginning, but they could not miss the end. That's the end of my speech. What I've said before is the student's humble opinion. Poplar Fruit walked out from the podium and said modestly, "There are a lot of immature and inconsiderate parts. I hope the seniors can point it out. Thank you." Poplar Fruit's thank you was very simple and powerful. Before he finished, he bowed deeply. His humble attitude made all the professors present very happy. Clap, clap. Luo Lin was the first to clap. Immediately after, the small conference hall was filled with thunderous applause. This was the affirmation from the elders. Poplar Fruit had to bow again until the applause gradually stopped. There are only 2 updates left for today. By the way, this month's update plan. Before the Spring Festival, Xiaohan's work had been too busy. Currently, he had been working overtime for 2 consecutive weeks. This week, from Tuesday to Thursday, he had worked overtime for 3 consecutive days and only left the company at 11 p.m. Xiaohan really couldn't maintain 3 updates a day. So this month, he plans to update once a day from Monday to Friday and twice a day on weekends. In short, Xiaohan will not stop updating, please rest assured. After the Spring Festival, work will not be so hard. At that time, Xiaohan may explode and update a few more chapters as an apology. I hope the seniors can forgive him. Xiaohan is ashamed. Chapter 526. The keynote report ended at 3:30 p.m., but Poplar Fruit didn't come back until 6 p.m. After he finished speaking, he was surrounded by many professors. Even Poplar Fruit, who could multitask, was confused by the questions thrown at him. Poplar Fruit had seen this scene before when he attended lectures by famous people in school, but he didn't expect it to happen to him so soon. In the end, Poplar Fruit and 5 other professors, including Professor Rowling, came to a small classroom provided by the organizers. They sat together and discussed intensely for 2 hours. In the end, if Poplar Fruit didn't miss his daughter, the 5 professors who were particularly interested in his new theory wouldn't have let him go. Before they left, Rowling and the others made an agreement with Poplar Fruit. The 6 of them would form a discussion group and continue to study Poplar Fruit's translation theory. Communicating with Rowling and the other professors, Poplar Fruit was not only transmitting his own ideas, but he also benefited a lot. Not to mention Rowling, the other professors were all famous and had received many awards. Their years of experience and unique personal perspectives gave Poplar Fruit a different kind of inspiration. This was the real purpose of the seminar. The current academic world was no longer an era of self-preservation. Especially in the linguistics and translation fields, the technological content was not high, so there was no need to hide. It was far more effective to have a few more people to discuss than to lock oneself in a room and rack one's brains. When they returned to the guest house, Kiki, who hadn't seen her father for the whole afternoon, was already impatient. When she heard the door open, she slipped out of bed, and Xiong Xiaolin couldn't catch her. The little girl ran all the way to her father, and her crisp and pleasant voice penetrated the corridor of the entire floor. "Daddy." "Haha, Kiki, did you miss Daddy?" Poplar Fruit picked up his daughter, threw her in the air, and asked lovingly. Chi-Chi's bell-like laughter followed her father's tossing, creating rings of invisible sound waves in the air. She reached out a hand, grabbed her father's nose, and pouted her little mouth as she said, "Chi-Chi missed you so much. Where did Daddy go? Papa, can you bring Chi-Chi with you in the future?" Chi-Chi looked at her father pitifully and acted coquettishly. "Daddy has to work today." Poplar Fruit rubbed Kiki's soft hair and said intimately, "Kiki can't watch TV with sister in the guest house." But there's no pleasant goat." Kiki pulled her father's sleeve and pointed to Zhu Jingjing. "Sister won't let me watch Pleasant Goat." "There's really no Pleasant Goat on the computer." Zhu Jingjing patted her laptop and said with a bitter face. Poplar Fruit asked about it, and then he knew the situation. In the afternoon, Kiki played with Goldie for a while, and then pestered sister Xiong Xiaolin, saying that she wanted to watch Pleasant Goat on TV. Xiong Xiaofeng ran to turn on the TV for her, and Kiki took the remote control and found the children's channel with ease. As a result, the children's channel was actually broadcasting some boring science and education programs, which made Kiki feel impatient. Zhu Jingjing just happened to bring the computer to take care of the 3 children, so Kiki pestered Zhu Jingjing to lend her the computer to play with. How could there be Pleasant Goat on Zhu Jingjing's computer, which was only suitable for children to watch? In the guest house, she couldn't figure out how to connect to the internet for a while, and finally Kiki could only be disappointed again. Poplar Fruit scratched his head, and then he remembered that his Apple laptop was broken in the car accident. The videos of Pleasant Goat that he downloaded for Kiki were all saved on the computer, and if it was saved on the hard drive, he could borrow Zhu Jingjing's computer. However, it was still inconvenient without a computer. Poplar Fruit smiled and pinched Kiki's chubby little face and said, "Dad knows. Today I'll take Kiki to buy a computer, okay? Then Chi-Chi will be able to watch Pleasant Goat." "Buy it for Kiki?" Kiki grabbed her father's big hand and looked at him with her big eyes and asked, "Kiki also has a computer?" Poplar Fruit laughed and rubbed her hair and said, "Little fool, isn't Dad's computer Kiki's?" "Chi-Chi is not a little idiot," Chi-Chi said angrily as she grabbed her father's big hand that was rubbing her hair. "Xiaofeng, Xiaolin." Poplar Fruit turned and smiled at Xiong Xiaofeng, who looked at him with longing. "Why are you still standing here? Go change your shoes, we'll go downtown tonight." Xiong Xiaofeng couldn't hold back, and he was playful by nature. When he heard Poplar Fruit's call, he slipped out of bed and ran to his shoes. His excitement spurred Chi-Chi on. Chi-Chi burrowed out of her father's arms and also jumped up and down on the ground while making a big fuss. "Jingjing, do you want to come too?" Poplar Fruit turned and asked Zhu Jingjing with a smile. Zhu Jingjing pushed the big frame glasses on the bridge of her nose, shook her head, and said, "No, I have to prepare for the dean's report tonight." Poplar Fruit just asked politely, and didn't insist. "Let's change into new clothes." Poplar Fruit saw that Xiong Xiaofeng and Xiong Xiaofeng were still wearing the blue linen clothes they brought from home, and the clothes they bought yesterday were put aside like treasures. He smiled and said, "Clothes are bought to wear, not to collect." "Uncle." Xiong Xiaolin walked to Poplar Fruit shyly, looked up and said with a red face, "Can you take me to see my mother?" "Yes." Yi Nuzhang had surgery yesterday, and only Xiong Jiwu was with her in the hospital. Poplar Fruit left the 2 children in the guest house to help take care of Kiki, but forgot to take them to see their mother. Hearing his sister's words, Xiong Xiaofeng, who was jumping up and down, stopped, and his eyes suddenly turned red. These 2 children, one was lively, and the other was calm, but they were both good children who valued friendship and righteousness. Poplar Fruit squatted down with guilt, hugged Xiong Xiaofeng, and then said softly to Xiong Xiaolin, "I'm sorry, Xiaolin, Uncle forgot. Let's go to the hospital to see your mother first." After changing clothes, Poplar Fruit turned into the head of the children's group again and led the 3 children to the hospital. Because the students in the university town were on vacation, there were fewer people on the road, but walking on the road, the 3 children of different ages, tall and short, attracted the attention of many passers-by. The arrival of the 2 children made Yi Nuzhang, who had just recovered a little bit, very happy. She didn't complain about Poplar Fruit, but because Poplar Fruit took time out of his busy schedule to come, she was touched. Yi Nuzhang's condition had improved a lot. After the operation, the disease didn't recur, and the wound was slowly healing. Of course, it took time. Poplar Fruit didn't disturb her. After letting the two children talk with their mother for a while, Poplar Fruit took them away. There are only 2 updates today, and by the way, this month's update plan. Before the Spring Festival, Xiaohan's work was really busy. Now, he has been working overtime for 2 weeks in a row. This week, from Tuesday to Thursday, he worked overtime for 3 days in a row until 11 o'clock in the evening. Xiaohan really can't maintain 3 updates a day. So this month, he plans to update once a day from Monday to Friday and twice a day on weekends. In short, Xiaohan won't stop updating, please rest assured. After the Spring Festival, work won't be so hard. At that time, Xiaohan may explode and update a few more chapters to apologize. I hope you can forgive me. I'm ashamed to retreat. Chapter 527. After the car broke down, Poplar Fruit only felt that it was very troublesome. Especially in the university town, it was very difficult to get a taxi, so Poplar Fruit simply took the 3 children to take the subway. Kiki was fine, but when Xiong Xiaolin and Xiong Xiaofeng saw the subway, they were shocked. For them, the subway was just a description of what their father told the outside world, but after all, Xiong Jiwu's words were pale. Even if he talked for 3 days and 3 nights, it was still not as good as seeing it with their own eyes. The subway was one of the most technologically advanced things in a human city. Colorful backlit billboards could be seen everywhere, fully powered closed doors, endless carriages, and LED screens embedded in the walls of the carriages. The most shocking thing for the children was when the subway suddenly climbed from the deep underground to the high bridge in Chong City. Because it was fast and the noise was low, the children almost didn't have any premonition. Suddenly, they found that the dark tunnel was replaced by the starry city lights, as if they had instantly traveled through time and space. It was also the first time that Poplar Fruit saw such a scene. Almost all the subways in Yangcheng were underground. He used to take the subway in Harbor City, but that was during the day, so it was difficult for him to feel such a strong visual impact. Papa. Kiki was restless in Poplar Fruit's arms again. She called out sweetly, then turned over and knelt on Poplar Fruit's thigh with her small knees. She almost hurt Poplar Fruit internally.
Ouch.
Poplar Fruit grimaced and quickly used his hands to support Kiki's legs. The surface area was too small, and Kiki's knees happened to be on Poplar Fruit's tendons, so it was very uncomfortable. Papa, Kiki also wants to play. Kiki didn't notice her father's painful expression at all. She twisted her body and pointed at the pull tab in the middle of the subway carriage and said excitedly, "Play what?" Poplar Fruit raised his head and looked at her strangely. "Pull tab? What's so fun about pulling tabs? Kiki should be like that uncle. Like this, pull that." Kiki raised her right arm and said. Poplar Fruit couldn't persuade her, so he picked up Kiki and walked to the middle of the aisle. Fortunately, there weren't many people on this section of the subway. Not many people were standing, so the aisle was quite spacious. "What are you going to do?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. He was taller, and Kiki was in his arms. She looked like a small mountain. As long as she raised her hand slightly, she could touch the blue tab. Kiki's eyes were wide open. She looked at it curiously for a while before reaching out to touch it. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but laugh. "What are you afraid of? This thing doesn't bite." Hearing the words bite, Kiki retracted her hand in fear. However, she immediately realized that there was a no in her father's words. With her father's encouragement, Kiki finally clasped a tab with her right hand. "Lower, lower," Kiki suddenly said in English. The little girl had learned some words in English, French, and other languages. Sometimes when she listened to her father read, she didn't know what most of the words meant. She only knew how to pronounce them. However, when she knew the meaning, she could use them very skillfully. For example, lower. Chi-Chi didn't know how to express herself in Chinese to ask her father to lower himself a little, so she used English words in a hurry. Poplar Fruit smiled. He moved his left arm, which was holding Kiki, down a little so that Kiki could hold the tab in a more comfortable position. Kiki grabbed the tab, and shook it. Then she twisted it. She found that the tab couldn't move, so she looked at the others to see how they were playing. Papa. Kiki let go of her left hand and pointed to another tab half a meter away. That. Kiki wants it too. You can't reach it, Poplar Fruit said with a laugh.
Why?
Kiki asked casually. No reason. Why don't you try it? Poplar Fruit moved Kiki to the left and held her with his right hand. Then he pulled the tab with his left hand. Chi-Chi waved her left hand in the air as she cried out, "Aya, Aya," as if she was exerting all her strength. However, Kiki was still too small. Even if she stretched out her arms, she still couldn't reach the tab. Oh! Kiki screamed in frustration. She turned her head to look at her father. Her expression showed that she was very unhappy. Are you blaming me? Poplar Fruit smiled and touched Kiki's forehead with his nose. He said, Dad told you to eat more food every day, but you don't listen. If you don't eat, how can you grow up? At this time, another station had passed. Several people came up. One of them took the first step and sat in Poplar Fruit's previous seat. He was a little fat and squeezed together with the Xiong siblings. When he saw Poplar Fruit holding Kiki, he jumped up again. He gasped and said embarrassedly, Brother, come here. You take the child. You sit. Poplar Fruit turned his head and smiled at him. He said, It doesn't matter. You sit. I only have 2 stations left. No, really? You sit. This fat man was very honest. He looked apologetic and insisted on giving his seat to Poplar Fruit. There's really no need. Poplar Fruit smiled and pointed at Kiki. He said, She wants to play with the tab. After confirming that Poplar Fruit didn't need to sit, the fat man sat down. He turned his head to look at the timid Xiong siblings. The Xiong siblings rarely saw such a fat man. They were a little afraid when they saw the fat man. The fat man scratched his head. He smiled at the Xiong siblings and then squeezed to the side to give them some space. Poplar Fruit didn't notice this. Seeing that Kiki began to concentrate on the tab in her hand, Poplar Fruit rolled his eyes. He smiled and moved his right arm that was holding Kiki's little butt down. Ah. Kiki was so scared that she quickly grabbed the tab. Although she was still sitting in her father's arms, the sudden weightlessness wasn't good. Poplar Fruit realized that he had gone too far. In order to not let his daughter blame him, he smiled and whispered in Kiki's ear, Kiki, let's play a pull-up, okay? What's a pull-up? Kiki asked curiously. You pull this tab, and then lift yourself up. Poplar Fruit pretended to lift Kiki up with difficulty, then put her down again. Kiki was very smart. She immediately understood. She nodded happily. Then she really grabbed the tab with her 2 little hands and pulled up with her little arms. With Kiki's strength, it was impossible for her to do a pull-up. Poplar Fruit smiled in the back, then gently held Kiki's little butt. He didn't use much strength. In Kiki's eyes, it really looked like he was pulling her up. Ha, ha, ha. Suddenly, Kiki's pleasant laughter resounded throughout the entire car. When the tired people in Chongqing saw Kiki's angelic smile, it was as if their fatigue had been swept away. They all smiled knowingly. I've wanted to write this plot for a long time. I remember that when Xiaohan came back from work, he saw an uncle playing with this ring on the subway with his daughter. Xiaohan wanted to give up his seat for him, but the uncle smiled and refused. The cute baby's crying still lingered in Xiaohan's mind. Of course, Xiaohan isn't Brother Fatty. Brother Fatty is a character for the plot. Don't get carried away. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 528. When they arrived at Nanping Station, Poplar Fruit called for the Xiong siblings to get off the car. He had to be extra careful. As the leader of the children's group, he couldn't leave any of the 3 children behind. Poplar Fruit saw that Brother Fatty, whom he had a good impression of, was also at the station. He was dragging 2 large suitcases in each hand. Of course, he didn't look like he was traveling, but more like he was delivering goods. Seeing him sweating profusely, Poplar Fruit asked kindly, Do you need help? No need. Thank you. Brother Fatty said gratefully. You take care of the children. I can take care of this. Nanping Station was crowded with people. Poplar Fruit struggled to squeeze out of the station with the 3 children. At this time, Brother Fatty's figure could no longer be seen. However, this was normal. In the vast metropolis, everyone you saw might just be a passerby in your life. After appearing once, you would never see them again. When they reached the ground, they saw Wanda Plaza outside. There were even more people here. There was also a commercial performance in the plaza. They didn't know which small celebrity was singing on the stage. Colorful laser lights danced in the night sky like a group of demons. Sister, hold on to my clothes. Don't lose me. Poplar Fruit squatted down and shouted in Xiong Xiaolin's ear. There were too many people here, and he couldn't take care of them all. He could only carry Xiong Xiaofeng, who was most likely to get lost. Xiong Xiaofeng was much heavier than Kiki. Although he looked a little thin due to malnutrition, he was still an 8 or 9-year-old boy. He alone was equivalent to 2 Kiki. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit was very strong. It wasn't a problem for him to carry one with one hand. Although Xiong Xiaolin was like her brother, dazzled by the bustling night market, she firmly remembered Poplar Fruit's instructions. She grabbed onto Poplar Fruit's clothes and followed behind Poplar Fruit. Walking into the shops of Wanda Plaza, there were fewer people and less chaotic. Poplar Fruit let Xiong Xiaofeng down. However, after walking around the first floor of the shop, Poplar Fruit regretted it. This place sold either gold, silver, jewelry, or high-end skincare products such as facial masks and toners. There was no need to look at the second and third floors. They were all high-end fashion. There was no need to bring the children here. After coming out, Yangwa picked Xiong Xiaofeng up again. They walked towards the food street. Compared to the big shops, this place was more approachable. What do you like to eat? Poplar Fruit asked Xiong Xiaofeng. Oh. Xiong Xiaofeng smelled the aroma of the barbecue and swallowed his saliva. However, he was too embarrassed to mention it to Yangwa. When Yangwa asked him, he didn't say anything for a long time. Kiki protested a few times with dissatisfaction. She saw that her father didn't ask her, but asked her big brother. She was very jealous. After attracting her father's attention, she excitedly pointed to the delicious food. Papa, Kiki also wants to eat. One couldn't answer, and the other wanted to eat everything. Poplar Fruit had to make the decision himself. First, he bought a cup of pearl milk tea for each of the 2 children. Then, Poplar Fruit found a barbecue shop that was not a roadside stall but looked high-end and hygienic. Give me 10 skewers, 5 skewers of beef balls, 3 skewers of chicken wings, 3 skewers of chicken legs, 3 skewers of enoki mushrooms, and 3 skewers of roasted leeks. The children were too shy. Poplar Fruit didn't ask them what they wanted to eat and directly ordered. Perhaps because he heard Poplar Fruit speak Mandarin, the boss asked with experience, "Do you want spicy?" Kiki doesn't want spicy. Kiki turned her head hard and said seriously. Poplar Fruit smiled and asked the Xiong siblings. The siblings were from Guishan province. It was their custom to eat spicy food. So, Poplar Fruit told the boss, "Then I want a non-spicy dish of each kind, and spicy for the rest. By the way, give me a bowl of porridge. I want fish egg porridge." Kiki doesn't want spicy food. Kiki wrinkled her little nose, pulled her father's arm, and said with dissatisfaction, "I ordered non-spicy food for you. Don't be afraid." Poplar Fruit laughed and said. Xiong Xiaolin quietly sat in the chair, motionless like a lady. Xiong Xiaofeng was still immersed in the lively atmosphere outside. He held the milk tea and looked around the barbecue shop. Then, he greedily took a sip of the milk tea and chewed on the springy pearls with relish. Poplar Fruit also bought milk tea for Kiki. However, Poplar Fruit didn't let Kiki drink too much. After all, the pearls were so small. If Kiki wasn't careful, she could choke on them. Kiki looked at brother Xiong Xiaofeng curiously. She imitated him and took a sip of milk tea. Then, she smacked her lips. Her head was full of questions.
What's so fun about this?
The barbecue was served. The spicy and non-spicy food were divided into several plates. However, the people in Chong City could eat spicy food, so they put a lot of chili on the skewers. The spicy smell could be smelled from afar. To people who liked spicy food, this was undoubtedly the most wonderful smell in the world. However, Kiki smelled it and sneezed a few times. She even shrank back into her father's arms in fear. Eat, don't be shy. Help yourself to whatever you want to eat. Poplar Fruit smiled and picked up a skewer with chili. He took a bite. He knew that if he didn't eat, the two children would be too embarrassed to eat. Hiss! Poplar Fruit suddenly grabbed the milk tea on the table and took a sip. He didn't expect the chili to be so strong. It exploded on the tip of his tongue, and he felt his hair stand on end.
Oh.
Kiki saw her father's expression and became even more dissatisfied. She twisted her body and shouted in protest, "Kiki doesn't eat spicy food." Hee hee hee. Xiong Xiaofeng chuckled. The Xiong siblings, on the other hand, enjoyed the spicy food. Xiong Xiaolin took small bites while Xiong Xiaofeng took big bites. The two of them ate with relish. This isn't spicy. Poplar Fruit picked up a non-spicy barbecue wing. He took a small bite first. When he felt that it wasn't so hot anymore, he moved closer to Kiki. Kiki shrank back in fear. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "It's really not spicy. If you don't believe me, smell it." Kiki mustered up her courage and took a bite. Her eyes lit up. It was so delicious. She couldn't help but take another bite, but her father didn't let her continue eating. The little girl had only eaten for more than an hour, so she couldn't eat too much. Poplar Fruit let her try 2 bites of everything, except for the leeks that were harder to digest. Then, she drank 2 mouthfuls of porridge. Kiki was full. In the end, Chi-Chi could only watch as her father gobbled up the rest of the barbecue. Although she really wanted to eat, she had already lost her appetite. Most of the barbecue was very spicy. Even Poplar Fruit couldn't stand it. Thus, the Xiong siblings happily had a delicious barbecue meal, especially Xiong Xiaofeng. He ate quickly and a lot. In the end, he was so happy that he couldn't even walk. Chapter 5:29. Poplar Fruit came out today not only to bring the children to the night market in Chong City, but also to buy a new laptop. After eating barbecue, Poplar Fruit took the children to the streets to find a place to buy a laptop. There used to be a digital mall here, but it was closed at night, he said, pointing to the Futian building after asking a passerby.
Oh.
Poplar Fruit sighed regretfully. He wanted to buy an Apple laptop because Apple's MacBook had good performance and was especially thin and light. It was very portable in his bag. But the digital mall was closed. Where could he buy one now? They wandered around the nearby squares aimlessly. It was getting late. It was almost 9 o'clock.
Kiki kept yawning.
The little girl wanted to sleep. Xiong Xiaofeng and Xiong Xiaolin were still in high spirits. Poplar Fruit didn't know if they had good physical strength because they often worked, or if they were in high spirits and didn't feel tired.
Hey, bro.
Poplar Fruit was about to go back when he suddenly heard a familiar voice. In Chong City, Poplar Fruit didn't know many people, but the word bro had a northern accent. Poplar Fruit heard it more than an hour ago. Turning around, Poplar Fruit saw the fat guy he saw on the subway poking his head out of a small accessory shop by the roadside. He was waving his hand and greeting Poplar Fruit.
Fat.
Poplar Fruit almost let it slip. He walked over and smiled. "Hello, you have a shop here?" "It's okay. Just call me Fat Brother." The fat guy chuckled. His smile gave people a simple and honest feeling. It must be fate to meet again in one day. "Are you out shopping with the children?" Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded in agreement. "Do you want some hair accessories?" The fat guy skillfully began to take off 2 headbands and promote them. "Little girl, you'll look good wearing them." No need, no need." Xiong Xiaolin waved her hand in embarrassment. "Haha, a little girl is still so shy." The fat brother had to retract his hand. In order to cover up his embarrassment, he had to laugh twice. Brother Fatty, show me one. Poplar Fruit stretched out his right hand curiously. He had a good impression of this straightforward and honest fat brother. Hearing Poplar Fruit's words, Brother Poplar Fruit's interest was piqued again. He handed over a sparkling purple butterfly flower and said to Poplar Fruit, "Brother, since we're fated to meet, and we hit it off so well at first sight," Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Brother Fatty won't lie to you." He moved closer to Poplar Fruit and covered his mouth as he said in a low voice, "We told the public that these are Korean goods, but in reality, they were all imported from Gyeongnan province. Of course, you don't have to worry. After all, the designs are all the same, and the quality is top-notch. Fat Bro here can guarantee that." Poplar Fruit took it and pinched it. The hair flower's fabric seemed to be real satin. The sparkling stars on it weren't broken crystals, but embroidered with a special reflective material. It was soft to the touch and didn't hurt. "Xiaolin, put it on for me to see." Poplar Fruit smiled. Although it was a suggestion because this little girl was too shy, his tone was a little more serious, and there was a sense of indisputability. Xiong Xiaolin was thin-skinned, and 2 patches of red appeared on her wheat-colored skin. However, because of the flickering lights, no one saw it. "It's pretty." Poplar Fruit smiled as he watched Xiong Xiaolin put on the hair flower. "Little girl, you're a natural beauty. I think if you walk around our shop with this hair flower, our business will be booming today." "Huh, I'm just kidding." Brother Fatty waved his hand and said cheerfully, "Sister, you're really beautiful." Xiong Xiaofeng didn't learn Mandarin well, so it sounded awkward. However, his praise was sincere, which made Xiong Xiaolin even more shy. "Haha, don't be an ostrich. Everyone is praising you." Poplar Fruit encouraged her with a smile. "How much is it?" Poplar Fruit was quite satisfied. If it weren't for the fact that Kiki had already fallen asleep in his arms, Poplar Fruit would have let Kiki try it on. Of course, Kiki probably couldn't wear it. "Haha, since I feel like old friends at first sight, I won't make any false promises. I'll sell it to others for this price." Brother Fatty opened his palm, then stretched out a finger and said, "Brother, 10 yuan is not expensive, right?" Poplar Fruit certainly wouldn't believe him about the cost, but 10 yuan for such an exquisite hair flower ornament was really not expensive. Poplar Fruit picked 2 more and paid together. "Brother Fatty, you're very familiar with this place, right? Do you know where I can buy an Apple computer in addition to the Digital Electronic City? I want to buy a MacBook." Poplar Fruit took the change and asked casually, "Yes, there is an Apple store in front, but it's expensive. It's the price on the official website." Brother Fatty shook his head and said, "If you're not in a hurry, come to the Digital Electronic City tomorrow to buy it. There are a lot of second-rate goods." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "It's okay if it's expensive. The quality of the store is still guaranteed, and can be guaranteed." He didn't know if second-rate goods could be trusted outside of Guangdong province. Maybe they were refurbished goods. "Uncle, do you want to buy an apple?" Xiong Xiaolin asked weakly. She held the plastic bag of hair flowers that Poplar Fruit gave her in front of her chest like a treasure. Poplar Fruit looked at her puzzled. Xiong Xiaolin continued to say, "We don't have to buy it outside. If Uncle wants to eat apples, we have a lot of them on the mountain. You can eat as many as you want. They're big and sweet." Poplar Fruit smiled. He patted Xiong Xiaolin's head and said, "No, the apple Uncle said is not a real apple. It's just a name." "It's from a laptop. Brother, you're really rich." Brother Fatty happily squeezed out of the store again. He clapped his hands and said, "I'll take you there. You don't know the way." "Don't you need to look after the store?" Poplar Fruit asked strangely. "It's okay. I'll just walk away for a while." Brother Fatty laughed. He shouted from the sock shop next door, "Auntie Lou, help me look after the store. I'll go out for a while." "Okay." He didn't see anyone but only heard the response. Brother Fatty led the way with ease. Along the way, he kept greeting the surrounding peddlers. It seemed that he was very popular. "Right, I still don't know how to call you brother." Brother Fatty laughed. "My name is Qin Yuan Qing. My friends think that my name is too hard to pronounce, so they all call me Brother Fatty." My name is Poplar Fruit. You can call me Little Yang. Poplar Fruit laughed. Just call me Brother Yang. It's more intimate. Brother Fatty said happily, I guess you're a teacher, right?
Huh.
Why do you think so? Poplar Fruit asked in surprise. Although it's not completely correct, it's not far from it. It's very simple. Brother Fatty laughed. Isn't the university town behind your subway line? The university town is filled with either teachers or students. Students don't have families to feed. Moreover, your temperament is the most similar to a teacher. They're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.